So I used to write for this game where you can fuck aircraft carriers. Uh,
As you can only in good games.
it was one of those World War II themed like waifu games where the ships are cute girls, right? And that's the characters. And one of the stories that I wrote was from the perspective of this Soviet Union destroyer who happens to read The Hobbit and enjoy it because it was, 1939, chronologically. The book had been out for a couple of years. Now, was there a Russian translation by that time? Not officially, but I thought it was kind of funny, kind of ironic to have her reading about, the dwarves reclaiming their kingdom and whatnot. So yeah, you have this communist woman character reading and enjoying The Hobbit. Fast forward 8 years, I am now a communist woman, reading and enjoying The Hobbit. And, if I'm going to write fiction that turns into fact, I'm glad it's something gender affirming like that and something fun like that. And, not the nonsense that I've written about werewolves inflating dragons.
Well, not yet. The other stuff hasn't happened yet. It's
Oh
possible.
God.
When did you write the werewolves inflating dragons? Because if it might be an 8 year delay kind of situation.
December.
Yeah. So guys, be on the lookout for what? 2032. It's gonna be an interesting year.
Our dragons will blot out the sun.
Socialist Shelf. Read good books and organize yourself. Socialist Shelf. Read good books and organize yourself.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf, the show that predicts for you when the dragons will blot out the sun. I am Jacob, as always, here
And
with
I, as
Lenore.
always, am Lenore. Welcome.
Yes, yes, we are here, and we are here to talk about, well, it's our first episode talking about him, not our last. J.R.R. Tolkien, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, the man, the man himself. Today's episode is going to be on his life and also on his first, but certainly not last, entry in the Middle-earth legendarium, The Hobbit. And, I'm just going to say right now, you're listening to this, you're almost for sure have, if not read it, you've seen the movies, you're aware of it. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. I mean, it defined the fantasy genre. It is huge. And full disclosure, these books are just like my favorite. I have J.R.R. Tolkien, his like language, his like runes he would write in. He had a way he would sign his name. I literally have that tattooed on my wrist. I am like a huge Tolkien head. Got like The Hobbit, reading that as a kid, like fourth grade, then reading The Lord of the Rings in sixth and seventh grade, like just foundational for me as like a reader, as a writer, as someone who like cares about this stuff at all. So, right up front. Now I'm gonna have my criticisms, but of him as a guy, but right up front, I just gotta say this is an episode I'm very excited, and this is going to be something of a series because we are going to be going through the various Middle Earth books. Not all of them. We're not going to get into like Unfinished Tales Part 4, though I have read it. But yeah. Lenore, what you have not read until now the works of Tolkien, right?
I tell you what, I have a really weird relationship just in terms of what I've consumed to J.R.R. Tolkien, right? The one experience with Tolkien that I think I can claim that I have that you don't is I remember seeing the Lord of the Rings films in theaters when I was quite young.
It's true. I did not see them in theaters.
Yeah, yeah. I was like 8 years old, I think, seeing Fellowship, and I was just mind blown all three times.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is truly like I've been hyper fixated actually on like watching Lord of the Rings reaction videos this week and just experiencing it for the first time again. People like
Right.
really hyped it, that we're here in charge of the Battle of Pelennor Fields and whatnot. Um, I've seen that. I've seen the Hobbit films and been bleakly disappointed by them, of course. In terms of reading. I read The Children of Hurin,
Lost
which
Children of
is
Hurin, yeah.
yeah, which is one of the side stories. Well, one of the prequel stories, I should say, to the whole lore that most people are familiar with.
Yes.
But I hadn't read Lord of the Rings. I had tried reading The Hobbit on like three separate occasions and gotten to the part where they're in the trees and there's fire and whatnot. I gotten like a third of the way through the book three separate times, and no antipathy toward the book. I just gotten distracted. But now I've finally read The Hobbit all the way through. I'm very glad that I did.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Lost Children of Hurin is a fun one. That's one of the Christopher Tolkien compiled and edited books that came out later. I think Huron came out like in the early 2000s. Like that was a really late one. Um, the original version of that story appearing in the Silmarillion and that being a more fleshed out version. That's a fun one and actually like weirdly important thematically for like understanding the full arc of like Aragorn and stuff. But we can get into that when we get into The Hobbit. Today, we are also going to be talking about Tolkien as a guy a lot since the Lord of the Rings, obviously all influenced by him. And The Hobbit, of these four books we're covering, the three Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit, will be the one where we have the least to say for sure, just due to its contents, due to its demographic. I certainly have things that said, but just it's aimed towards children and it's a little shorter, a little lighter on content. But we have plenty to say about the man himself, J.R.R. Tolkien. So let's get into this bio. And I'm just going to say off the top, Tolkien as an Englishman, got a lot of there's its whole thing. This ties in very nicely with the C.S. Lewis episode, actually, as the two were personal friends. So, if you've listened to that or if not listened to that, maybe go listen to it at some point because these two would tie in closely. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born in 1892, and here's our first ouch, oof, ouch, owie Englishman moment. Do you know where he was born, Lenore?
South Africa, wasn't it?
Bloemfontein, South Africa. Not great. Obviously, no fault of his own that he was born as to colonizers in South Africa, but his father, Arthur Tolkien, was a sort of middle level like bank employee who was sent to South Africa with the promise of a promotion. All he got out of it, was scarlet fever and death. I came here and all I got was this lousy scarlet fever, as it were. So the Tolkiens moved back. So, right off the bat, to give, JRR his mild credit, while he does not remember living in South Africa, he was always anti-apartheid and basically said like he was anti-race discrimination, though he does, we'll get into it, have some, English style racial moments.
There's bits and pieces. Yeah, I'm halfway
But
through
we'll get into
Fellowship
it.
now as we read this. Yeah, there's bits and pieces where you can kind of see, just the prejudices of the time he hasn't really shaken, but
We'll get into it. But nevertheless, to his credit, did not support what was happening in South Africa, but nevertheless, comes from that. His family moves back when he's 3. Classic moment where you're on vacation and your father dies, so you never return. We've all been there. So he lived in, and I've said this before and I've messed it up, but Worcestershire. I have trouble saying that. Worcestershire. With near his family and just big fond of the outdoors, including his Aunt Jane's farm. And do you know what his Aunt Jane's farm was called?
What was it called?
Bag End. So just straight up took it from that.
This
His
was
mother,
interesting to me. Like
yeah,
my reading about the Shire, like I understand it was basically dedicated to the English countryside that he grew up in. The place
yeah,
names, the names of
all of
all
it.
the hobbits are real.
Yeah, it's that, and it's just like him living in Worcestershire and Birmingham. Like it's just straight from that. And notably, obviously, we'll get into this with Return of the King. The scouring of the Shire has a lot to do with some of the sort of post World War I and certainly into World War II industrialization that
Mhm.
those areas experienced and what ended up kind of happening there. But at this time, he is learning from his mother, being taught at home. His mother teaches him to speak Latin, and my man gets very, very interested in linguistics and language. And this will be a long time obsession of Tolkien's is language. His mother around this time converts to Catholicism to her massive financial detriment, because her family cuts her off for it.
Mm.
Their family are Baptists. And you're not super common in England, but very committed sect of Baptists in that area, and they were not pleased with her for that. Um, yeah,
England and Catholicism have such a fascinating relationship. Like I remember in college reading about, succession laws and whatnot, and I think this was right around the time of the royal wedding with like Kate Middleton and shit.
yeah,
And I remember reading, oh, there was a law that if you convert to Catholicism, you're disinherited from the English royal family. When was this repealed? Oh, June.
that's awesome.
Like,
And it's interesting. His mom actually, shortly after converting to Catholicism, dies of diabetes. She is dead broke. She has no money to support herself. Already in the early 1900s, it was not easy, even if you did have money, to survive with diabetes. But like when you're broke, there's just nothing you can do. Um, he writes of her, my dear mother was a martyr indeed, and it is not to everybody that God grants so easy a way to his great gifts as he did to Hilary and myself, giving us a mother who killed herself with labor and trouble to ensure us keeping the faith. End quote. And I read by the way, a compendium of the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien ahead of this, in preparation, as well as other biographies, from stuff from the Tolkien estate, plus just stuff that sticks in my brain from knowing about this guy. But yeah, his mother was a lovely woman, but he was orphaned, by age 12 at this point. And he is taken in by a very important figure, Father Francis Xavier Morgan, the
awesome name.
his godfather, and also as a Catholic. And this guy is very like, he's known around town as the priestly gossip. Like people like know him as like a guy who is like very devout, but he like talks mad shit. And Tolkien loves this guy. Like this guy is huge for him. And this guy helps Tolkien like get into good schools and stuff like that because they do not have money, but he's like, this kid is brilliant. This kid's got to get, so he helps Tolkien get a scholarship. Really, really encourages him. In 1911, Tolkien forms TCBS with his friends at school, the Tea Club and Barovian Society. Now, this is a
Barovian.
group that secretly drinks tea in places they're not supposed to drink tea and talk about fiction. So they'll like sneak into department stores where it says like no drinks allowed, and they'll like sit on the chairs and drink tea so they can be like edgy. But like they know it's funny and bad, but they like doing it because they just think it's funny. Like
Honestly, mood.
it's a good bit, honestly. Like, we're so bad, we're drinking tea. But like in a place you're not supposed to. And the Barovian Society, that's referring to the department store they were banned from repeatedly. The
Okay.
Barovs or whatever.
So like if we snuck into like say, I don't know, Target and just like knocked back
Repeatedly.
yeah, just knocked back some monsters, like the monster chugging Target
Yeah.
queers.
And they just talked about fiction. And this group is important for two reasons. First of all, people say it really is emblematic of Tolkien's sense of humor, as his sense of humor is described by everyone as like impish, like by different people who have no way of knowing that someone else described Tolkien as impish, will describe him as impish, which is a very specific. He's just like kind of like just likes to do silly little things. Like
There's
it's
yeah.
interesting.
It,
And he
it
reflects in his work a lot too. Just like
yeah, it's
characters
like
who like to just like mess up like come to dinner and then like they're cleaning the plate and being genuinely nice, but juggling it. Like that's
that's
his
what
sense of humor.
that's what Bilbo Baggins hates, the song. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but
like
then
people
genuinely not breaking the plate.
exactly. It's a very German sort of humor. Right? It's just like something that's like
Yeah.
slightly out of place where there's not explicitly a punchline, but just something that's like slightly off and like, oh, isn't that weird? Isn't that strange?
But TCBS is important for another reason, which is that this is actually kind of the origin for Tolkien of like what will become the Inklings. His relationship to the Inklings. If you listen to our C.S. Lewis episode, that is his writer group. This is like for him very much like a proto version of that. And will inform that community he finds at Oxford because unfortunately the rest of TCBS bites the dust in World War One. Tolkien is basically, I think, the only survivor of TCBS. So when he
Wow.
finds the Inklings, that's like very important for him because that's like recapturing this thing he had as like a youth when
Oh
he
yeah.
first started reading about literature.
And I mean, World War One again, like the psychic scars that it rends in the working class British public that largely fights it, right? It wasn't uncommon for regiments to draw for specific regiments to draw from like specific towns. So like if one got annihilated, like there was like all the dudes from that from your neighborhood.
Yeah. And that is essentially what happened with Tolkien. And you read his letters from the front, and he's writing things like, well, another one of the tea drinkers went down today and
Yeah.
stuff like that,
I
which
remember
is
reading
interesting to
about
hear him talk about it like
I
that.
remember reading about like ceremonies celebrating the end of the war, and like one of them had a procession of 100 mothers who had each lost her husband and all of her sons.
Yeah. In his early teens, so around this same time, he starts talking with his cousins Mary and Marjorie Inkledon. And if you know the name Marjorie Inkledon, you probably don't, but she is actually like considered one of the greatest glass blowers of all time and oil painters. She's like a very successful and like moves the like is important in like women in the art scene, like getting their recognition in England.
Cool.
Happens to be Tolkien's first cousin. Not they don't like they are not really that close after like childhood. Not like there's no like beef or anything. They just don't really. They kind of grow apart. But Marjorie and Mary, these women, they're the ones who introduce Tolkien to the idea that you can just make up a language. Because they make up a language called Animalic. Um, and Tolkien is like, holy shit, you can do this. And they're like, yeah, why not? And he's just like, this is the greatest day of my life that you can just make up a language. I am going to devote my life to this. Um,
Brilliant.
he collaborates with them on two different languages before the age of 16, Navarish and Nevbosh, which is just languages he's made up. And when he's 16, he makes a written alphabet for them.
Navarre. See, that's weird to me because like Navarre is actually a region of where is it? Like northeast Spain now?
Yeah, I don't know if he's just like I don't know if he's just like freestyling, like this is what they speak there, haha. Like there's not a lot of information on
Kind
it.
of like how C.S. Lewis just like invents India.
Oh, well, that was his brother. That was
Oh, that's
Warren
right. That's
Lewis who
right.
did that.
Yeah.
But yes, it might be like that. It's funnier with Spain because he like definitely knew Spanish people. But like, nevertheless, the same year he meets Edith Mary Bratt. He is 16 years old, and she is a woman who is like down to talk to him, even though all he does is like run around in the woods and make up fake languages, which he finds to be remarkable that like anyone is interested in him because he's just this wild guy. He's actually considered very athletic, but he's just like always running around in the woods and like coming back and being like, I made up runes. And he says she was willing to talk to me about my mad fairy language, is what is one thing he says.
We should all
She
have somebody who supports us in our weird fixations.
absolutely, and he supported her in hers. And do you want to hear what it is?
Hmm.
I'm not kidding. She liked to go to the second floor of places, get sugar cubes and drop them onto people's top hats and to see how much they could stick and whether they would stay on people's. She was like her favorite little game, and they like played it together as like not as like 17 and 8 like 17-year-olds.
See, if they ban TikTok, kids are just going to start doing that.
That's so like it's really cool to do that, and it's really funny to be like 16, 17. Well, the thing is she's a little older than him, so he would have been 16, she would have been just turned 18. So she's an adult woman dropping sugar cubes, and I love her for that. Really, really support that. But here we have Father Morgan putting his foot down, and he says, John, what are you doing talking to a Protestant? Because she's a Protestant. And he's like, but my mom converted. And she's like, nope, you can't talk to a Protestant, John. And he says, plus she's older than you. Now she's like a year and a half older than him, but still. And he says, well, when can I talk to her? And he says, well, listen, John, I'm gonna like he's like I'm genuinely like he says like I'm you're gonna be in genuine trouble with me and with the church if you keep doing this. He says you are not old enough to get married, you are irresponsible. All of these things are objectively true. He is not old enough to get married, he has no money, he's irresponsible. And he says if you are 21 and you still want to be with her, you reach out to her. He does not speak to her from age 17 to 21. He's forbidden. On midnight of his 21st birthday, he writes her, proposes marriage. She's engaged to someone else. She breaks off the engagement. They get married and they're together for the rest of their lives.
Yo, wow.
Is that not crazy?
Wow,
Like
that's dedication.
it sounds fake. There's like letters we have from the guy she broke off the engagement with, who's like, who is this bum that just like came out of nowhere? And he wrote, this guy's only prospect is that he's gonna die in the Battle of the Somme, which is a really funny roast. This guy's only prospect is that he's gonna go die in the trenches, which is objectively true. That was basically the only prospect Tolkien had at the time.
Oh yeah.
She can and Edith converts to Catholicism for him, so that little thing gets tidied over, and so
So
Father
hey,
Morgan deals with it.
if you feel like, you're getting nowhere in your life, you're not accomplishing much, y'all, it does get better.
That's true. I also want to note, just this is very on theme. Guess what happens when she converts to Catholicism?
What?
Her family cuts her off. This
There we
happens
go.
this is just this endless thing. Or not her whole family, but like the family she was staying with, like family or family friends or whatever, they evict her for it. So she gets evicted immediately upon engagement. Uh worth noting she was also an orphan. That's another thing they bonded over. But at this exact time, 1914 hits, Tolkien is just old enough to go to war, World War One, and my man is like, I'm not going to war. Like, I'm not doing this shit. I don't want to do it. And his family is like, you got to go to war. He has got his letters where his family is just straight up like roasting him, calling him a coward, saying you're not a real Englishman. He's like, I don't want to do it. I have no desire to go do this. So he like goes to college, and in college he's able to like get a stay. Eventually, after like by 19 let's see, by 1916, like he's basically like gunpoint. They're like, you're drafted, you have to go. Like you have no
Mhm.
choice. He's a guy who's like known as an athlete around town. Like there's just no getting away from this at this point.
Yeah.
He is made a junior officer. Um, and he is shipped off to the front and he fights in the Battle of the Somme. And he does not speak of anything that happens to him until he's like 60 years old. Like he
Oh
just
yeah.
doesn't tell anyone. Uh, what is known, very little is known about everything that went down. His letters from the front are like full of like just not really him talking about what's happening. What the few things we know from Christopher Tolkien, we know J.R.R. Tolkien, his father, at one point put some like oil on himself to keep lice away, and it turns out that it was like the oil attracted lice, and he contracted a blood disease. Um, it we know he breathed in at one point he breathed in some mustard gas, just a little bit, but still he breathed in some mustard gas. And we know he was injured in the Battle of the Somme, was eventually and eventually he was basically taken from the front. And the rest of his battalion was wiped out very quickly after this.
Yes. And
Tolkien was
mustard.
his wait, well, one second. The Tolkien was a sickly man for the rest of his life. He was known as an athlete until he was in his early 20s. And for the rest of his life, he's like every letter, he's like, I was feeling quite ill this morning. He's for the rest of his life, he is quite sick.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, mustard gas, I mean, for those of you who don't know, like there's places in France where nothing grows still because
Yeah.
of fucking mustard gas from World War One. That ruins everything it touches.
Hmm. His first son, John, is born in 1917, around the same time. And in the same time, like he's now allowed to do clerical work until 1919. And they say like he just spends a lot of time like walking in the woods, which he's like was his favorite thing. He would run around the woods, and he really just like cannot do more than like a slow walk. He gets winded very easily, but at the same time, he's like coming up with ideas. He's like reportedly like he thought of the idea in the hole in the ground. There lives a hobbit around this time. He thinks of the tale of Beren and Luthien around this time, which is his like great love story that he conceives. And he says he bases it off his wife in these years, right after she's given birth. He says she's like very pale, and he like imagines this like pale fairy woman who lives in the woods or whatever. Beren and Luthien will eventually be written on their gravestones, which are next to each other.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
And in this time, he conceives of the Lost Tales, of Gondolin, and his Legendarium. The idea of Middle Earth is fundamentally created sometime between 1917 and 1919. Notably, there are a lot of letters from this time missing. And it is because Christopher Tolkien says, I cannot, in good conscience, publish some of the things my father wrote to my mother. Which
So we're not going to get any like James Joyce type, oh yeah, I fucked you good and you farted,
Yeah.
like, you know.
it was that though. Like it was that, like we don't know what, but it was like that kind of thing. It's like very much in the book. Christopher Tolkien is like, for discretion and for my whatever he says, and I'm like very happy for my parents, but I'm not publishing this stuff.
Wow. Dirty J.R.R. Tolkien letters, just imagine.
Well, they had like 4 kids, you know. It was happening, and they were obsessed with each other, you know. Um,
Just really Randy Tolkien.
yeah, there you go. Um, So yeah, there's also a good quote from Tolkien where he says that like World War I did not make him a better writer. He said it made him a worse one. It made him a weaker person. He said, these are my years where I should have been reading the most, learning the most, writing the most. My early 20s, like where I was the most full of vigor. And he says, and that was like stolen from me. So he feels like
Yeah.
his whole career, he feels like his potential was like shortened dramatically by this period.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and as it was for, I mean, a generation. I mean, not even just for the people who died, though certainly them, but and he gets that, and that infects his work. So he now becomes an academic. He works at Leeds College in the early 20s, where he works on a dictionary. He writes like the definitive Sir Gawain and the Green Knight translation,
Oh, let's go.
which is still used. And he's like just doing all this different like writing on these different languages. At this point, like it's unknown how many languages he spoke, but like it's in the dozens. Like it's an insane amount of languages that he's able to speak, that he's able to write. He is like borderline, what's the word? Perfect memory, basically. Like,
Eidetic, yeah.
yeah, like that's not like necessarily a real thing, but he's like pretty close to that, at least when it comes to languages. Like he has an obsessively, like he reads a language a few times, and according to even some of his college students, like he would be like, we've gone over this alphabet 4 times. Like, how do you not, can't you write in it? Like, that's just, people liked him as a teacher, but it would be like, he's like, we've done this 4 times. Like, that's like, because that's just how it was. He fucking read it and he understood it. Like, it just, his brain was wired that way,
That's
which is
incredible.
remarkable. He then in 1925 gets to go back to Oxford, and that's his shit. He stays there forever. He loves Oxford. It's where he's got the Inklings. It's where he meets C.S. Lewis. There's nothing I can really say about his relationship to Lewis that we didn't say on the Lewis episode, except that they're good friends, that he's just constantly berating Lewis over everything. And that like Tolkien, I think, kind of enjoys having Lewis as this guy who's like, this isn't good, but like Tolkien is clearly like, I like having this like friend that's dumber than me. Like, because he is like C.S. Lewis is not as smart as Tolkien, and like
Yeah, yeah.
he can hang with him, but he likes like having this other guy who's like, yeah, like this is kind of my sidekick, dude, C.S. Lewis.
Mhm.
And they've got this gang of people, the Inklings, and you know, notably Christopher Tolkien is the last living Inkling, you know, who died fairly recently,
Yeah.
but they all of this stuff, the Inklings is where he writes the Hobbit eventually. He writes it for his kids and just for the Inklings' enjoyment, because Lewis is like, you should write a fairy story. And he's like, I'm going to write one, because Lewis was already mad about the whole Out of the Silent Planet not writing the time travel story business, as we discussed last time. So
Mhm.
mad that he wrote Tolkien into a story and had his stand-in character murder him with
That's
his bare
still so
fist.
funny.
Great friendship. Around the same time, he's seen as this marvelous professor. He's considered the premier English Beowulf expert. And he'd apparently walk right into class and just like sometimes would paint stuff on his face, like runes. Like there was a time where he painted up his stuff in like Nordic body paint, shirtless, not a guy that like looks flattering shirtless, very bony chested man, limping. Comes in and just starts hollering in like Old English or like Norse or whatever. Like people loved his class. But also he was like a hard professor. And this is around the same time he's like, he gets like really into the idea of the Hobbit because his friends, and it's almost by accident that it actually like even gets published, because like he gets convinced to send it in. And then like you read his letters about the founding of the Hobbit, like the writing of it and everything, and like the people really like it, but like he's like disagreeing with them over stuff. And like there's discussion of like how many illustrations it'll have. Like this is an endless thing that goes back and forth, whether Tolkien will do the illustrations, how much money it'll be. And then when it comes out, it's just like huge. Like no one saw it
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah, that was interesting to me. Like the 75th edition, the 75th anniversary edition of The Hobbit, which I read, mentions that in the intro, right? That Tolkien had quibbles over like oh, the whether or not red is used in this particular illustration, like this in absence of other colors makes the mountain look like a cake or something.
Mhm.
Very, very like trivial to you and me, but clearly representative of a particular artistic vision of his.
Well, and he was also limited by like budget. They would like give him like you
Yes.
can use 3 colors in this painting, this image,
Hmm.
because of like how printing worked. So he was like just very particular about it, but didn't expect it to get published at all. And then it's just huge. It's massive. Um, and at this point, like it's 1936 when it gets published. People demand a sequel, and he's like, "Oh, well, I've got this book, The Silmarillion," and everyone who reads it's like, "What the fuck are you talking about? We're not publishing this."
I tried to read the Silmarillion in seventh grade. I imagine, similar
Mhm.
experience, the general public moving from The Hobbit to that.
Hmm. So he says, okay, I'm going to write a new story featuring The Hobbit. And everyone's like, heck yeah. But he immediately runs the problem and he writes it in his letters. He said, I've said he lives happily ever after to the end of his days. And I don't want to change that because I'm not going to lie. And he's like, I got to write a new story with hobbits. And so he originally sets out to write a story about hobbits in their daily lives. And then Lewis tells him, and this is a Lewis W here. He says, hobbits are interesting when they are in very unhobbitish situations.
Yes.
And Lewis nailed it for that one. And so Tolkien starts to write another story, and it's supposed to be a children's story, and then he says the story gets away from him and it becomes a more adult story. And it's Lord of the Rings. And it actually takes him quite a while to get it published because of, World War II, but it eventually comes out 1954 and 1955. All 3 books are released in that period. And it
Hmm.
is huge beyond reckoning. I mean, the most popular book in the United Kingdom, Amazon's Book of the Millennium. It is, listed it's on every there's different ways of quantifying bestsellers, but it's in the top 10 best-selling books of all time.
Which
Just
again, Book of the Millennium, like if you
that's a
think
huge, yeah.
if you think 1000 to 2000, like, and going from fucking like vellum calfskin, to like paper, it's a big swing to say, yeah, this is the Book of the Millennium, considering that, what we know as a book has changed in that time.
Diana Paxton makes the comprehensive argument in the 1970s myth lore that Tolkien created the fantasy genre with Lord of the Rings. Now, there's quibbles about that, but like the concept of the fantasy genre, high fantasy, as we currently understand it, there is no arguing that it is just fundamentally shaped by Lord of the Rings to the
Oh
point of
yeah.
it almost has like for some people experiencing for the first time. Now, this is, I would quibble with this, but some people even have the like that have consumed a lot of fantasy, have the like Seinfeld isn't funny effect with Lord of the Rings, of
Hmm.
the like, this has been so adopted by culture that it feels like a stereotype, and it's not. It is everything came out of this. It wasn't a stereotype when it was written. It was, but of course, Tolkien is pulling from myth and lore himself. But the elf, the ranger, the whatever, D&D, the classes are fundamentally based on this. Ursula K.
Orcs.
Le Guin, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, that hack Terry Brooks. I feel like how many episodes in a row can I insult Harry Brooks? Martin Carr, Dungeons and Dragons, Legends of Zelda, Harry Potter. Like these are all just pulling directly the films. When the Lord of the Rings films will eventually come out, they of course will be huge too. That's not what we're talking
Hmm.
about today, but
Magic the
it's just
Gathering, of course. They did that
massive.
Lord of the Rings set, like.
Massive. The RPGs in general pull from Lord of the Rings. There's the War of the Ring tabletop game ends up being in big for like tabletop games. Like this thing, everything it touches turns to gold. It is actually like kind of remarkable how successful it is and continues to be all this
Culminating, of
time
course,
later.
in that masterpiece video game Gollum.
Yeah, the greatest game of all time. Greatest game of all time, baby. Um, Interestingly enough, it's after after his death that some of the other works will be published. And just to wrap up his life, because I know this is probably the longest bio we've ever done, but it's all good. Um, Tolkien, he retires in the 1950s, 1951. He actually later regrets not retiring earlier because he had the money to, out of his books, because he's thought he maybe could have written more. But he really liked Oxford, but his wife really was ready to move out to the countryside. Um, he loved his fans, but he just genuinely did not really know how to handle interactions with fans. He had this problem where someone would write him a letter, and he would, and to our blessing, because we have a lot of these letters now, he would answer it exhaustively, and he would just like not get his work done that day because he's trying to answer the letter so exhaustively. The thing is, when you have thousands of fan letters a day, and this was the problem, his name was until the early 50s still in all the phone books. People were just calling him up and he would just talk to them because he was like, well, I got to tell him about Middle Earth. Like,
Yeah, this is the closest you can get to that kind of accessibility these days, I feel like, is on Twitter, right?
right.
There's a chance that like you can be mean to J.K. Rowling and she'll see it,
Hmm.
but like you can't just, there's no more like calling up this or that person, The days of being able to walk up to the White House and knock on the door are long over.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but he was like, always very gracious with fans. He just had this relationship where he didn't like he didn't quite know how to interact with them. Like not I can't find any examples of him ever being like mean or anything. He's just like almost overly exhaustive in his answers. At one point, like there's a point where the fan asks a question about his language, and he literally hand draws like 5 pages of runes and their evolutions through the years, which is like one of our documents on how we understand the evolution of Quenya. Like there are still, it is estimated by the Tolkien Foundation, hundreds, perhaps thousands of letters out there that like would answer questions that we still don't have the answers to, that somebody has somewhere, or like God forbid got thrown away. But
Yeah.
like there are still like people like they pay good money for those. They, because he wrote some like pretty insane, like interesting stuff in that stuff. But in 1971, Edith Tolkien dies, and J.R.R. dies in 1973, not very much longer later. Yeah, they're buried, like I said, buried next to each other with Beren and Luthien on their gravestones, and Christopher Tolkien, his son, named his literary heir. The next year, Christopher Tolkien publishes The Silmarillion shortly after his father's death. Um,
Oh wow, I didn't know that was posthumous.
yes, I mean, it was completely done. He just didn't live to see its publication. Um, it then Lost Tales and all the like the 10, there's like 10 volumes of Lost Tales. Um, so many things came out, like just his different works and the evolution of it in the world,
Hmm.
and it's gets incredibly in depth. And Christopher Tolkien, who like maybe will get his own episode at some point, does so much work on all that that like is a whole nother conversation. But suffice to say, JRR spent a lot of time just like in his study, just filling out sheaves of paper about just like obscure events. And after his death, it was very difficult to figure out what was canon. It was difficult to figure out what went where. It was difficult to figure out whatever. It was extra difficult because sometimes he would start writing in like languages that he didn't write the key down for. So people had to like translate it. By the end of his life, he had made like half a dozen full languages like that are genuinely like Quenya is a more comprehensive language than English. It's more grammatically correct. Like it works better grammatically than like a lot of actual
Oh
languages.
yeah, I mean, well, it benefits from, having a linguist have
That's
complete
true.
creative control over it, rather than hundreds of years of, loan words and linguistic drift and all that. And indeed, it really is the dream of every creative to see what you've created go on to. I mean, people learn to speak Elvish, Sindarin and Quenya, like in the scores of the Lord of the Rings films, right? Some of the pieces that Howard Shore writes are in those languages. The fucking, the bridge at Khazad-dûm.
So fucking good. Dwarvish, yeah.
It's yeah, the Dwarvish. Yeah, exactly, exactly. To see that used and become a medium in its own right is really, really, it's something that everybody aspires to.
There's one letter where Tolkien about dwarves finds out shortly after the publication of The Hobbit that an certain ancient society made Dwero the plural of dwarf, and he had written dwarves, and Tolkien like almost has a breakdown. He's like, "Oh my God, I didn't call it Dwero. That sounds so much better. That's so much cooler." And he asked his publisher, "Can they recall the book?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" But there are some publications of The Hobbit, a few hundred out there, that say dwarfish and elfish with an F,
Hmm.
which was grammatically correct. And Tolkien thought the V sounded better, dwarvish and
Literally,
elvish.
literally,
And that is what
that's
it's written
yeah.
like to this day.
That's how I feel. I love dwarves, I love elves. Like, well, and it's weird because elves, like you see it rendered as such,
It was
but in
elves though, you don't find elves with a V until Tolkien, which is
but in
crazy.
most other like non-Tolkien fiction dealing with dwarves, right? You see dwarfs like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, right?
Yeah.
It's weird that that gets the treatment and elves does not.
Yeah. Who can say? But I will say that Tolkien doesn't completely lose the plot because he does sneak Dwero a few times into Lord of the Rings.
Dwero
Uh,
Delph is a
yeah, that kind of
place,
thing.
yeah. Mhm.
Because he feels makes him feel a little better, I guess. One of those guys that like wanted to revise his book after it was published, so he's like adding appendices and stuff, but there's just really nothing he can do about it. Um,
Mm.
Also like suffers from like that world building thing where his editors had to tell him no sometimes. Notably Lord of the Rings, the concerning hobbits like chapters at the top were
Yeah.
originally like chapter one, not an appendix or anything like that, which is would have been insane. It's already kind of insane. But yeah, he's just all around interesting figure. Politically, there's just not a lot there. Tolkien is this conservative in the sense that he loves tradition, but he's not very invested in the like political side of it. He has one letter that gets cited all the time where he just self-describes as an anarchist. But it's if you read the letter, it's not really anarchist how we would think of it. I can quote it, but he says, "My political opinions lead more and more towards anarchy, philosophically understood, meaning abolition of control, not whiskered men with bombs," which is a funny joke, "or to unconstitutional monarchy. I would arrest anybody who uses the word state in any sense other than the inanimate realm of England and its inhabitants, a thing that has neither power, rights, nor mind, and after a chance at recantation, execute them if they remain obstinate. If we could get back to personal names, it would do a lot of good. Government is an abstract noun, meaning the and process of governing, and it should be an offense to write it with a capital G or to refer to people. If the people were in the habit of referring to King George's council and Winston and his gang, it would go a long way to clearing thought and reducing the frightful landslide into theocracy." It's a little bit like he just doesn't, and he goes on to say, like, "I've served in the military and there's no one." He says there's less than one man in a million who deserves rule or control. He's inherently skeptical of the idea. But here's the thing, unlike, I don't know, Frank Herbert, Tolkien becomes interested in the idea of, well, who is that person that deserves control then? He
Yes.
he thinks that's really cool. And he has like a list, and that's more Lord of the Rings, but he has a list of things that make someone deserving of that power. And one of them is you absolutely cannot want it. There's like a bunch of different things. Um, and he is very adamant that like there needs to be less whatever. He is anti to call him anti-imperialist, I think would maybe giving him a little too much credit. I think he is abstractly anti-imperialist. I see very little evidence that he did much to be anti-imperialist. He does have the one real political move he made basically in his life that I can find is he decided to not go forward with a German translation of The Hobbit because they asked him to prove his Aryan ancestry. Um,
Oh,
and he
I am aware of that letter. Yeah.
And he writes a long, and this is prior to World War II. He writes a long letter, proving that Germans aren't Aryans, which offends him quite a bit. He's like, that doesn't make any sense. Aryans are from the Indian subcontinent, and you were not. He gets a little Ben Shapiro there. He's right, but
Yeah.
and then he says, but I assume this is just to say that I'm not Jewish. He said, unfortunately, I am not a member of that like noble people, and I have no like. So he writes like a defense of Jewish people, which like, shouldn't be seen as radical, but unfortunately in Britain in the 1970s or 1930s, there was a lot of that sentiment.
Oh yeah.
I'm not using this to call him like, I don't know, a civil rights icon or something, but given the standards of his time, some of the stuff he's written about like women and men, it can sound very dated, but he is actually considered kind of progressive compared to his peers. And he's
Hmm.
like one of those guys that's just like does not he's like one of those guys that would be like today probably just be like, I want my government out of my health care, out of my guns, out of my weed, and out of my marriage. Like he's just doesn't, but while loving the Catholic Church. He's
Yeah,
fascinating.
loving the Catholic Church, libertarian in, the actual honest sense and not just, the vanguard for, fascism sense,
Yeah, because he doesn't like big businesses either.
Yeah,
He sees that as the same as like big government. Like he doesn't think like, oh, private enterprise. Like, no, he actually quite resents the big businesses that like come into the towns and destroy it. He's an environmentalist of sorts, likes preservation and things like that. So like
hmm
he's just I think he thinks the Shire is how everyone should live. Like I think that's what he wants life to be.
Yeah, like strictly, there's a Thane of the Shire, but his station is largely ceremonial, right? There's bounders, there's a border patrol in a sense, but
They don't do a good job though. They suck.
hmm
I
Yeah,
think that's just what he likes. And I think he just has this kind of idea of like we could all mind our own business and be decent folk.
exactly, exactly. The hobbits, are a people who are perfectly content to be left alone, and the Shire largely is, it literally like forgotten by most of the rest of the powers of Middle-earth.
Mm-hmm. He but like yeah, he's so, one of those guys. He's not some epic communist or anything like that. He's just not radical. He loves the Catholic Church, but even then he doesn't want the Catholic Church to have political power. He's like very explicit that he doesn't want that. He just is like, yeah, no, I think the Catholic Church is like cool. And like he even gets very mad at the Catholic Church when they start doing their sermons in English rather than in Latin, because he's very interested in the concept of the divine mystery. And he's like, Tolkien, here's the thing. There are debates whether Tolkien believed in God in a literal sense or not. I think he did. I think the evidence suggests that he did. I'm not really, but he is way more interested in like the whole vibe of the thing, of like
Exactly.
humanity's relationship to like divine grace and like this transcendent mystery that you cannot fundamentally understand. It's why he likes in his works when he touches on the divine to not explain it, which is like even magic in his works. He will not explain it. And he has a very specific reason for that. It is not because Tolkien like doesn't explain things. When he wants to explain things, he will write at you for pages. He leaves things that are divine open and dramatic and like this just experiential thing, which is what he beefed with Lewis about. Because Lewis would be like, well, how old is the earth? And Tolkien would be like, who gives a shit, you loser? Like things like that. That was where they would fundamentally disagreed. It's why Tolkien almost regretted like using logic to convince C.S. Lewis to become a Christian, because he's like, he took this too far. Because Tolkien's logic was humanity is inherently connected to myth with a capital M. And he says he feels like Christianity, Catholicism is this true embodiment of myth, which is what elevates humanity in a specific way. And he found Protestantism to be a bastardization of that, to take the stained glass and the Latin and the light and turn it into like folding chairs
Right.
and like Ken Ham and like fucking Left
Exactly.
Behind.
Because if anybody, if any lay person can hear the voice of God, suddenly it ceases to have that, mystical quality, as you say.
Right. It's so that's Tolkien. He is when we'll get more into, but that's my general bio. That's a long general bio, but we've got a lot to say about the guy. He's very
You know what?
important, and more could be said too.
I
So
had I had my Lovecraft episode. You have your Tolkien episode.
yeah. So just fascinating guy. Always smoking a pipe. I'm trying to think of other little quirks. Did not like to wake up early. Was very anti waking up before noon if he could help it. Um, just a
One of those anti-bedtime anarchists, perhaps.
that would be really funny if Tolkien was like that kind of anarchist. After everything he wrote, he was just like I'm an anarcho-pyroist. Blessed be
No,
the
yeah,
flame.
yeah.
Like,
Like I do legit think like bedtime is something that the hobbits value very much.
oh yeah, no, that's the thing. He just doesn't like. He's just inherently skeptical about stuff. He wants everyone to be just like a decent person. Um, and yeah, there's very little class analysis in that. Every now and then his letters will talk like politically and he'll say something that's like true, but it's very like naive sounding too. He's like, I just don't understand why all the working normal folks can't get together and get rid of these annoying politicians. Which like true, but it also sounds very like, elementary. Like he'll say things like, well, I sure do prefer, my local bartender to the millionaires who go to Oxford. It's like, he has the like right spirit of it, but he certainly never really investigated anything.
Exactly. It's that thing of where, okay, I'm gonna look at the, this or that political poll and try to track these trends. It's the sort of 538ification of politics to look at
Hmm.
these things and not exactly take the next step to, organizing to change them.
Hmm. He did call Winston Churchill a thug a few times, and that's true. So,
Based.
um, yeah, and like, multiple times, and he I also will say he wrote one of his only like really mean letters is when a guy said Lord of the Rings was that Sauron and Lord of the Rings was a stand-in for the Soviet Union. He was like, that is just not true. Like he got like very mad that anyone would imply that Sauron was, and that there was like a real world political analogy to be made out of Lord of the Rings. Like that in the sense of like an allegory, like the West is this and the East is that. And
Right.
like to the point where he like partially regretted like putting Gondor in the West and Mordor in the East, even though he did it based on the actual geography of Europe. Because Middle Earth is pulled from the geography of Europe. It's supposed to be ancient Europe. That's like changed through the years.
Well, and
But he
literally,
partially regretted doing that just straight up because people were so much like East and West. However, I will say there probably is some like English bias bouncing around in his brain and forming some of that. But like,
well, and as well, like there's expressions, there are constellations, there are rhymes, there are bits and pieces of the world that we know now in the world of Middle Earth, right? They have their own thing that they call the Little Dipper, right? They have their own version of, Orion and Orion's belt in the sky, literally fucking in Fellowship, right? Frodo has this huge long song that he sings in the Prancing Pony. That's Hey Diddle Diddle, the Cat and the Fiddle, right? The rhyme that we know now is a degraded version of that,
it's
which
so true. If only we had
it's
been there.
it's so
No,
bizarre.
Tolkien in a lot of his letters maintains that Middle Earth is real and he uncovered the history too. Like that's a bit that he really enjoyed doing.
I do enjoy that though, like the
Mhm.
the the idea that because that's the other way that I kind of characterize some of the humor in The Hobbit to come to the book that we're now discussing. Um,
Yeah, hour and a half or whatever we are
well,
into
because
this.
some of the humor in The Hobbit doesn't exactly land with me. To me, um, it feels like it's translated directly from another language. You can kind of see where the joke is, where the punchline is, but it doesn't exactly land in English. Like,
That language is British. It's just the way they are over there,
well, yeah. Well, yeah, like and indeed, that is the conceit of his works, right? That, oh,
Hmm.
I am translating this from, what Western is. I'm translating this from what like Elvish is, what Dwarvish is, rendering it in English. It's indeed, it's a convention of several fantasy books that we're aware of that they have this language that appears here in English, and our expression that they use here would have appeared differently in whatever language they're speaking.
You know what Bilbo Baggins' real name is, right?
Oh, fuck, I don't recall.
It's Bilba Labingi.
Bilbo Labingi.
And Frodo's name is Mara Labengi. But this is the it's the anglicized
Anglicized, yeah.
versions. Yeah, versions of their names is Bilbo and Frodo, and that's what Tolkien's saying his translation is. But if you said it in the original Hobbitish language, it would be Bilba Labingi, which it's insane that he even added that. He didn't need to do that. He just liked it.
Fantastic, fantastic fucking drag name, by the way.
Bilba Labingi. She Bilba on my no, that's not anything.
She Bilbo on my Labingi till I go there and back again.
That's what she go there and back again on my Labingi till I I I think that's probably what Christopher Tolkien was in the letters that he had to write out. It's just that back and forth. Honestly, knowing them and their sense of humor, not completely impossible. His letters are just so fucking funny too. Like it's just the stuff he says. He's always apologizing for stuff like just he's apologizing for everything all the time, but like often to make a point about why he was right. And he has like just random lines he'll write, like a letter to Christopher Tolkien that just says, Mummy seems to have taken to car riding. He writes to his 16-year-old. And it's just like and later in life, Tolkien was very car skeptical. I like this story. He's very until he becomes old and he's almost deaf, and then he starts to like driving cars.
It's
And
wild to me that
he
this
apparently would.
guy,
Sorry, go ahead.
well, this guy who fought in World War One was born in what, like 1892?
Mm.
Like, it's wild to me that Tolkien lived to see the moon landing.
Oh yeah,
Like, he just seems so set in this particular past, in
yeah.
this particular time and place, that, to have him cross over into this more modern era, and see, what we consider like technological milestones of, the mid-Cold War, like, it's just weird to have him existing at the same time as that.
I mean, his grandchildren said though, even into his old age, he was a menace. When he would drive his car, apparently he was again deaf and partially blind and almost deaf, and he would yell "Ride Rohirrim" and hit the gas pedal and would make people get out of the way
He's just at
because
the fucking stop signs, they're like, death!
no, literally he would quote his own books and drive like really fast. And also in church, while they were reciting mass like in English, he would yell it in Latin every single time until the day he died.
The dream.
Which like no one could do anything about it because he was like the guy that had been there forever and he was like old and everyone liked him. But they said his grandchildren were just mortified all the time, which is awesome. And then just always smoking his pipe, just a cool guy who discovered the history of Middle Earth. And, we now can get into because this is the greatest fantasy epic of our time, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, the enchanting prelude to Lord of the Rings. That's what it says on the front of my cover. And then it says The Lord of the Rings is now an epic motion picture trilogy from New Line Cinema. I think that shows when it was published.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it says The Lord of the Rings was now. It's not talking about The Hobbit. It's talking about The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
And what is a hobbit? Hobbits are little people, smaller than dwarfs. They love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. They dislike machines, but they are handy with tools. They are nimble, but don't like to hurry. They have sharp ears and eyes. They are inclined to be fat. They wear bright colors, but seldom wear shoes. They like to laugh and eat 6 meals a day and drink. They like parties, and they like to give and receive presents. They inhabit a land called the Shire, a place between the River Brandywine and the far downs. The Hobbit is a story of these delightful creatures, a story complete in itself yet full of portent, for this is the book that tells of Bilbo Baggins, the far-wandering hobbit who discovered, some say stole, the one ring of power and brought it to the Shire.
Oh, okay, so that's basically a paraphrase of the one to fourth paragraph of chapter one. Then, okay,
Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, you're right. That is all that is.
gotcha.
Um,
Okay,
And right off the ground, we have an unexpected party. And since I've talked so much, Lenore, you want to set the scene for us here?
yes. I mean, if you're reading like the Kindle edition of a book, right, and you'll see, like X amount of people have highlighted this passage. This is one such passage. This opening paragraph. It's iconic in fantasy. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. And that's the sort of person that Bilbo Baggins and indeed the hobbits are. It's a race of creatures that lives a pastoral life, just kind of keeps to themselves. They have very little industry that we're aware of. They all have their estates, they have their farms, and they grow their own food and they trade. And theirs is a very gift-giving oriented culture. It's real chill. It's real chill and largely untouched, though not completely untouched by the outside world.
My husband says to shoehorn in a something something your mom about not a nasty, dirty, wet hole. So to shoehorn that in, or that's something. So someone shoehorn in a wet your mom joke. Just imagine I made one there. But yeah, no, the hobbits, and this is one of the many species invented by J.R.R. Tolkien, commonly called halflings in other media, though it's also called halflings in Lord of the Rings in parts by the Men of Gondor. And they're just these little guys. They live in the green, lush Shire. If you've seen the movies, just the plains of New Zealand, just perfectly shot. And you've just got this remarkable little fellow, Bilbo Baggins. He's literally just a little guy, and he's literally just chilling. And
Mm.
and as troublemakers tend to do, as these wizard type tend to do, you got this big old dude, Gandalf, this big gray bearded wizard, walks on over and decides to muck everything up. And
Yeah.
just walking right into this guy's life, just pure hero's journey, as pure hero's journey as you can get, as pure like Merlin style wizard as you can get. You've just really got this pure classic moment of like
And
Bilbo
the
and Gandalf.
And the intro to Gandalf, I think, we touched on this a little bit in the What is a Hobbit thing, because the mother of our particular Hobbit, what is a Hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, and then Tolkien goes on to describe hobbits. It's a real conversational style that the story has, because again, this started life as a bedtime story that he told his kids, right? So when Gandalf is introduced, it's Gandalf. If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Very conversational, right? As if this is a story that a folk tale that he's relating to you, you being his kids at the time
Second
originally.
second person book and as many episodes.
Could this be second person spring?
It couldn't. That's unlikely because Lord of the Rings is not second person, and we will be getting.
No, it's not. That is the stark difference between Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is very very mature in bearing by comparison to the Hobbit.
Except the one part where there's never mind. I'll get into that. We'll get into that when we get into there. I'm just gonna mention the fox, who's my favorite character in Lord of the Rings. But
Oh, I'm not to that yet.
oh no, you're past it. It's one sentence.
Oh, wait. Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
Anyway, I'm cutting this because it's not anything. Um, so yeah, right here you have Bilbo outside, and he says to Gandalf, "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. Insane description, by the way. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all day before us." And it's just, you got these two characters, they're going back and forth, and Gandalf's like, "Yeah, I can fuck up this guy's life."
This is one of those language games that Gandalf plays that forms the nucleus of a lot of the humor in this book that didn't exactly land with me. But how, I can see if you're a kid and if you're hearing, Tolkien throwing you like four different definitions of how good morning could be, I can hear the kid of a linguist like laughing at this.
Well, in a minute, Bilbo says good morning to tell him to leave. And he says, what an awful lot of things you say good morning for. And
Hmm.
you get this immediately again in the first chapter of Lord of the Rings, which is intentionally written to rhyme with the first chapter of The Hobbit. But you get
Yes.
the Bilbo's wordplay in not first chapter, but in the first couple chapters of Lord of the Rings, which also shows how much Gandalf has rubbed off on Bilbo through the years.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
And that is charming, by the way, to see not only those echoes of The Hobbit in Lord of the Rings, but knowing what little I know about Lord of the Rings, to go into The Hobbit and to read, oh, they got literally like Glamdring, that magic sword from that troll hole early on in the book. Like there's bits and pieces of the lore that I'm only aware of through a superficial contact with the story that I'm like, oh, this is a nice surprise.
And so suddenly dwarves start showing up because Bilbo rejects the idea of an adventure, but Gandalf's like, he can do an adventure. What's an adventure between friends? And so dwarves just start rolling up at Bilbo's house.
Come on, in and out of the Misty Mountains. 15-minute adventure, Bilbo. Come
I'm cutting that. I'm cutting
on.
that. Absolutely, absolutely positively not
What?
unacceptable. No, I'm just kidding.
Jeez, Gandalf. Like, I don't know if I want to leave my Hobbit hole. There's tea here and whatnot. Do they have tea in the Misty Mountains even?
Nevertheless, so you have the dwarves just start to roll up, Dwalin, Balin, Fili, Keely, and they're all just saying, at your service, and doing their little bows and taking off their multicolored hoods. And I will say, this is another moment that is very like, when you think Lord of the Rings, you think, not grimdark fantasy, but you're thinking a more intense type of fantasy. When you're thinking The Hobbit, I mean, like right off the bat, these are like Snow White dwarves here. These
Yeah,
are
exactly.
very silly little fellas. Even if they have their somber moments, these are like this is not like Gimli. This is like who is like, a short jacked human basically. You've got these are like 3 foot tall little like gnomish
Yeah,
guys.
bearded, apple cheeked. Like, there's, I think the live action Hobbit, for what it's worth, I think represents them pretty well. I mean, Richard Armitage is Thorin. I like Richard Armitage, but like Thorin just kind of looks like a guy.
Hmm. Yeah, the film version I want to talk a little bit about at the end, but it does actually do this early part fairly well. I think it doesn't quite get the color of them. Like they don't have the bright hoods and stuff like that, but
The best detachable party hoods, as Tolkien says.
I love that. Detachable party hoods. Need me that. But
Never leave home without your detachable party hood.
and then you randomly get some they start eating and they start talking about going on an adventure and referring to Baggins as a fellow conspirator. He gets all nervous. Um, and then so they talk about a dragon and says may never return. And Bilbo goes, struck by lightning, struck by lightning, and falls on the floor. But then he gets a moment of courage as they then pull from his Took side of his ancestry because the Baggins are comfortable folk, but the Took on his mother's side are a little more fiery. And as we might know, the old Took's great great uncle Bullroarer was so huge for a hobbit he could ride a horse, and he charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king Gulfinbull's head clean off with a wooden club. And it sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And in the same way, the battle was won, and the game of golf was invented in the same moment. So, I mean, Bilbo does have that ancestry in him as well.
Which is wild to me because, like, okay, so there are golf courses somewhere in the Shire that we never encounter, but like
The whole thing
it's
looks like a golf course, really,
yeah, essentially,
in its way.
there's a sand trap somewhere over the hill. Like,
That's what the old forest was originally, and it got out of hand. It just got out of hand.
oh yeah, the Barrow White is just like a golf hazard.
It's possible, the average like country club person and a barrel white, not far apart. So at this point, we kind of get into the lore. We get into what the actual like purpose is. The and they sing they sing a song that really explains it about the far over the misty mountains cold. We love that.
This is wild to me because like you can believe this song as something that they've kind of come up with on their journeys, but like Tolkien will have his characters busting out like dozens of stanzas of poetry that they just come up with off the top of their heads, which in a sense, you can if you read about cultures that are that have like the Scottish tradition of like flighting, basically like medieval rap battles, you can see in human history examples of people being very, very like literate and articulate off the cuff.
And that's the thing. He's pulling from a lot of these old like legends and stuff. And he wants it to be more like that. Like he wants it to be like a mythos or a part of a mythos. And he's like, what would happen if we were like in Beowulf? What would happen if we were in this great epic? And he's like, it would be cool if the guy just started rapping right now. If Samwise dropped a beat, a sick beat. But and you get the story of Erebor. Which, Lenore, you want to give just the basic overrun of what happened with Erebor and the Lonely Mountain? Why the dwarves are so fucking mad?
Well, this stuck out to me first, and I want to get it out of the way so it's not on my mind. Bilbo, Bilbo's like, okay, like I don't know what you're talking about here, but like I'll hear you out. And he says, tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. And having just seen and read Dune, that stuck out to me because I looked this up. Like that's the only reference to the last desert and to wereworms in all of Tolkien.
Yeah, that's it.
Somewhere like Paul Atreides is like one, and the Fremen are like leading a jihad in fucking I don't know. But
Imagine if Bilbo was the Lisan al Gaib. How
oh
cool that would
shit.
be.
Oh
Lisan al
man.
Gaib, and he's just like trying to get tea. That'd be kind of sick.
Bilbo just kind of opens the way into the Lonely Mountain. He's like, it seemed the right way. It's no. So
Yeah,
yeah,
may thy I'm, I'm trying to think. May thy yeah, I don't have an equivalent of knife. A chip and shadow would still be a knife in Lord of the Rings.
yeah, may thy Orcrist chip in. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
no, it won't because it's made of thrice folded steel.
Erebor was this kick-ass dwarven kingdom, and then this dragon Smaug comes along and basically burns them out of it.
Fucking
That's
hate
the
that guy.
Yeah, that's the extent of it. So, Thorin is the I mean, and between now and then, you also have these big long wars with the goblins. The goblins and orcs are essentially like interchangeable terms.
Yeah, the term orc is I think used once or twice in this book.
Yes.
It's the first usage of the term orc. Goblin, of course, not being invention of Tolkien. What basically gets kind of established later on is that like goblins are what they refer to orcs who live in caves as.
Yes.
And so they tend to be like a more stunted, like whatever, like big-eyed and all that because the way that like cave fish get or like creatures that live in the dark for too long. And then the orcs are a little more human-like. Especially the Urukai, but that's later. But so it refers to this, even the big orcs of the mountains, which are like big people. And this book also confirms that orcs' arms are supposed to hang below their knees, and you never see that depiction anywhere, except my book that I wrote because I wanted the orcs to have arms that hang below their knees. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah. But they had some battles with the goblins and orcs that like didn't go
Yeah.
particularly well.
Which originated the name of Thorin Oakenshield, right? Because Thorin, of course, royal dwarf lineage, son of King Thrain, son of King Thror. Oakenshield comes from him distinguishing himself at the Battle of Azanulbazar, I believe it was,
Yeah,
where he picks up a branch and he defends himself with it. And
pretty
that's
cool.
that. It is pretty cool. It's represented, for all its faults, kind of cool in the film.
The
But yeah,
big
so
CGI Manu Bennett walking around.
yeah, literally a video game cutscene.
Hmm.
So yeah, the dwarves have been driven out of their ancestral home, and they're looking to get it back. It's Thorin, a couple of his nephews, Fili and Kili, and then some other dwarf notables that have formed a band, and they've run into Gandalf, and they need one more person because they are 13, the dwarves are, and 13, as we know, is unlucky.
Not a good number. So you got to be 14. It's not going to work
Mm.
out. And Gandalf, he can't commit to staying the whole time because he's got other business. You know how he is. You know how wizards are. You can't count on him.
Well, if you're
Uh,
a wizard, you got to go and fight the necromancer.
true, true. Which the necromancer is like this interesting lurking figure at the edges of the story that never emerges, which is fun. They reference it once, like what if we have to deal with the necromancer and things like that. But we'll talked about it more a little later, but it turns out that even like Thorin's father was in the dungeons of this necromancer, this guy who's no, who's on the outskirts of Mirkwood. Actually, I'll read a quote from one of Tolkien's letters about the necromancer.
Mm.
Um, it says, because this is in reference to someone and talking about The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and saying, I want to read it to my kid at bedtime, but there are like little moments that sometimes are a little too scary. Um, One reader wanted fuller details about Gandalf and the Necromancer, but that is too dark, much too dark for Richard Hughes Snag. That's the guy who was worried about his kids. I am afraid that Snag appears in everything, though. Actually, the presence, even if only on the borders of the terrible, is, I believe, what gives this imagined world its verisimilitude. A safe fairyland is untrue to all worlds. So he actually finds it to be interesting to have this looming dark on the edge of the story, right? Because you have this very, like, it's not exactly color by numbers, but color by numbers ish, almost Grimm's fairy tale. We got to go on the quest type quest. And then you see in multiple places just over the hill, like, holy cow, this guy has made a lot in this world. Like you see the depth of the world now and then it kind of peeks
Yes.
through. And the necromancer is this moment that it's referred to a few times. And it doesn't end up being important in this book, but it will end up being Sauron.
Yes, yes, and that's the thing. Like, I love because again, as I understand it, The Hobbit was not intended to like be expanded into the Lord of the Rings
No, he had no
initially.
intention. He had really like he had this vague idea that he might like publish the history of the elves, which was
Yeah.
like would become the Silmarillion. But even then, like that was not going to be, he didn't even have a concrete idea of that. He thought this was a one and done.
Right, right. And the way he later expands the lore of this into the lore of that is really fun to me. He's like, "Oh yeah, like this thing that I said here, well that plays into the story in this particular way." But while we're inhabiting the Hobbit, there is indeed because of its initial like one and done kind of status, there is indeed more of the explicitly fantastical in the sense of, just something magical that entertains a kid, right?
Like
Like
a talking bag.
I was literally just about to say that. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
talk about it. Speak to it.
yeah, so early in the story, Bilbo and the dwarves come across these three trolls,
Oh,
which
really quickly, tell him.
yeah,
Oh, I'll tell him. Bilbo's job, to be clear, is the burglar. The
yeah,
Gandalf tells him he's a professional burglar. Basically, he's the rogue of the party. He's the sneaky little fella. In fact, our early editions of D&D and games like that, some of them discussed having the word burglar instead of rogue as tribute to this, but didn't want to be hemmed in too much to him being a non-combat character. Lord of the Rings Online, the burglar class is that it's the sneaky little guy is what a burglar is.
mhm.
Um, and Bilbo is supposed to be a professional, and he is not, which is a bit of humor there.
He
But
is,
go on, Lenore.
yeah.
But that's an important context is when they see these trolls, they're like, "Well, we've got a burglar. Come on, man."
Yeah, these trolls, which have, among names like Bilbo and Thorin, Fili, Kili, Gandalf, Dwalin, like Bert, Tom, and William. Like, there's
Love those guys.
just these three, like, big British lugs. And they have,
Boy,
yeah, exactly. So Bilbo, goes around and tries to pickpocket one, and the dude's, like, coin purse literally talks and is like, "What's up?" Like, and you never hear about why that is. You never see another talking bag in all of the Tolkien legendarium that I'm aware of. It's just this
no,
thing. It's just this thing that happens to trip Bill. It's very like, oh, I'm making up the story on the fly for my kids. What'll I have that sort of I'm not gonna have Bilbo like fuck up and accidentally like just fuck up his pickpocketing. I'm gonna have something magical that exposes him, which is charming. But again, really doesn't fit with the rest of Middle Earth as we come to understand it.
I also like that it's written very like stylistically, so bat coin purse says, "Yeah, who are you?" It's like very, and then it's got the little Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo because he's starting to say burglar. A burr hobbit? What's a burr hobbit got to do with my pocket, anyways? Like, it's just those little things, and then it leads to a extended bit of like Looney Tunes humor where all the dwarves get captured, and eventually Gandalf starts doing little voices in the woods, making them argue with each other until the light comes and they all get turned to stone. And here's the thing: there are some lore heads, right? When you go online, they're like, Gandalf is clearly powerful enough to take on 3 trolls. Why did he not in Tolkien's work? The answer is because this is just what this was, right? He's writing this story set in this world. You might as well ask, like, I don't know, there are stories in like Arthurian myth where Merlin doesn't just drop everybody because
Yeah.
Arthur has to go on a battle and Merlin tells him to go into battle. And there are other stories where it says Merlin is strong enough to devastate the battlefield. Why didn't he? I don't know, because it's a myth, and that's what he's writing here.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, if you really want to get in universe about it, it's because Gandalf is basically a physical deity or a minor deity, and like it's something that would entertain him. He can approach a situation pretty much as an epic level D&D character, just however literally he wants.
in fact, there's a moment later in this book where they're all captured by the goblins, and Gandalf just like walks up and just goes, like blows everybody back, and then he's like, "Let's go."
Literally, just pulls out his like fucking sawed off wizard staff.
Yeah. I feel like there's also like if you really some of the real lore heads get into this, but they're like there's a part in this where it says Gandalf might have died if he had jumped off this tree, and they're like, well, the narrator of this is supposed to not actually know everything about Gandalf, which I guess whatever. I Tolkien exists in this place where he can be incredibly specific about his world, but he's not like I don't know, like it's not the same as this like obsessive like perfectionism. It's like in a different type of way. I don't really know how to explain it. He's a perfectionist about like language, but when it comes to just like stories, he'll just be like, oh, these simultaneously exist because this is myth. A lot of the same way he approaches, I don't know, his Catholicism is this just general like this is about the experience, man. And it's a yes and situation. It's like this is a story that has been passed down to me. So it's gonna have some contradictions in it.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong. And I enjoy his ability to exist in this way.
Exactly. There is a certain intriguing mystique about, yeah, you've made a perfect idyllic place in the Shire, right? You've created this essentially the closest thing we've seen to a utopia in the fiction that we've discussed. And then, oh, by the way, that's next door to a forest full of barrow wights and this dude Tom Bombadil, who I never explained what he is, but maybe he's God. I don't know. There are just these things that exist around you that are more powerful, that exist on a different plane than you can possibly perceive, and that's just the world. That's just the
Mhm.
world. There's always a mystery just over the next hill.
Absolutely.
Um,
Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that it confirms once that William's last name is Huggins and his name is there's a troll named Bill Huggins.
Bill
Um,
Huggins.
and I love that as seriously as people take their epic fantasy, it all started with just a troll named Bill Huggins.
Hell
And I
yeah.
think that's beautiful. So next up, the party literally takes a short rest, D&D-esque, chapter 3. It's just called a short rest, which is pretty funny to me. And you have another song, you know. What are you doing and where are you going? Your poison is chewing, the river is flowing. Oh, tra la 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 here down in the valley. I'm not singing the whole thing, but the elves are just on their wacky shit. They're
Yeah,
they're they're just doing their thing.
if y'all have seen, listeners, Lord of the Rings, right? Just imagine fucking Hugo Weaving as Elrond, right? Just imagine Orlando Bloom as Legolas, right? Those elves, with the gravitas and the mystique and the splendor. No, these are different, like more mischievous elves than we are familiar with from the ubiquitous like films, right? It's really it's
But
closer
but
to
it's interesting. The depiction of them in the films is absolutely the depiction they have in Lord of the Rings, though.
in
So
Lord of the
like
Rings, yes.
interpret it how you will. If you want to say in the decades between this, the elves became a more somber folk, you can say that.
Yes.
You can put it how you want to put it. You can say they reflect the spirit of the land. However you like to understand that. Tolkien doesn't seek to explain the contradiction because he's just like you know, at best you might get out of him is, oh, those were different elves. Like, I don't know.
I mean, they're still in the House of Elrond, but it's interesting to me because there's a bit and this is jumping ahead to the next episode, but there's a bit in Fellowship where Aragorn says, yeah, like the tale of Beren and Luthien is sad, like all the tales of Middle Earth are sad, and it's like, oh, we're
Hmm.
this world is in, for all the idyll, for all the fantasy, for all the beauty of this world, it is one that is in decline and does have a preordained sort of end.
Yeah, in fact, the preordained end, which again we'll get into in Lord of the Rings, actually happened like hundreds of years ago, which is a very
Hmm.
interesting thing. But that we'll get into that with the rings.
Oh, will we
Gosh,
ever?
there's just so much here. Um, which also makes the Hobbit so challenging because you keep touching on these things that are like huge jumping off points. But yeah, it is funny that they can just burst into song at any point.
Yeah.
Um, and it is here that they figure out a cool little thing, and it's about the moon runes. Where Elrond figures out if you look at the thing at the right thing, you look at the map at the right angle, it will reveal secret messages, and if the light on Durin's Day, which is a special holiday, will fall on the keyhole in the side of the mountain and will unlock the secret entrance. Again, it's just very a fairy story.
Well, and who better to tell you about secret messages from space than Elrond Hubbard?
The man, the man himself. You know what? If Guillermo del Toro had gotten to make his Hobbit, I guarantee you he would have had Hugo Weaving singing this song.
Oh,
He would have done
100%.
it, and that's the cowards couldn't handle it. It would have been that, and it would have been Benedict Cumberbatch dressed up in practical effects, wearing Benedict Cumberbatch just wearing a dragon suit, running around.
Giant Benedict Cumberbatch.
Um,
Cowards. Cowards all.
I've read fan fiction like that.
Maybe I've
Didn't
written some of it.
yeah. I honestly, given what Tumblr was like in the mid 2010s for Benedict Cumberbatch, it almost certainly exists. There was an obsession with that man that I certainly have no explanation for. Um,
A living Onceler, truly.
just save that for the Sherlock episode. Uh, he actually
Oh,
does a pretty good
yes.
Smaug voice in the movies, but
They, again, there are, I mean, damning with faint praise, right? There are aspects of those films that I like, and Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug is one of them.
mhm. Which the faint praise then shows that they had the budget to do things like that, and then they like screwed it up. So.
Just did a whole
Over
bunch of
Hill
other,
and
yeah.
Under Hill is chapter 4, which is a little bit of maybe a pun question mark that will come back later because Frodo will later take on an alias Underhill. Is that anything? I don't know. It definitely is because Tolkien has never written a word that he didn't think about a lot.
Yeah.
He might write a sentence he doesn't think about. Might write a plot he doesn't think about. But if it's one word, he thinks about it a lot because he
And
loves his syllables and shit.
And here's something else that we stumble through that he does in fact leave for just kind of in the past. They're going through the Misty Mountains at this point, and like there's a storm, not just a storm, but there's like giants throwing rocks around just for fun. That never comes up again.
Okay, so I do hate to have an explanation for this one. They're just
Oh boy.
trolls. They're just trolls.
Okay.
That's what the canonical like if you that was like the retcon later on is that the giants are trolls.
Okay.
Um because they just never recur. But which I guess trolls are giants, but
I accept that. I
is it
accept
as it
that.
is.
What's interesting to me then is who else they encounter in the mountains because they take shelter in a cave, and then of course they get stumbled across by this patrol of goblins, right?
Goblin Town.
Yes, goblin down to Goblin Town, and they get taken to see the Great Goblin.
And
Now,
to be clear, this is a common misconception. This is not the same place that the Fellowship goes in when they go under the Misty Mountains. This is a separate town underneath the Misty Mountains that is not connected to Khazad-dûm. And Tolkien heads will be very, very frustrated with you if you imply that they're the same place, because they are not. Even though there's just no reason to say they're not, but they're not. Goblin Town is a different thing. It's a different thing.
It's literally a different thing. And Tolkien goes into an extended description of goblins here that I want to toy with. Now, goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves, when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture they make very well, or get other people to make their design, prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days and in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. So you get a little shade of his experience with, machines of death and killing in the real world, right? Right? Who but goblins? Who but, this sort of like this weird like underground monster sort of man could have invented mustard gas or machine guns or that sort of thing. Goblins, that's who.
We this is a passage that will often be cited in the is Tolkien's Legendarium racist discussion, however. And there is a case to be made that writing something like this in the 1920s,
Yes.
there were people who felt that this could be seen as a dog whistle.
Mhm.
I can say with pretty strong confidence that it wasn't, that Tolkien is not doing a like wink wink like Jewish thing, which is what some people took this to be. I can
Mhm.
also say there were contemporary readers at the time who also took it that way, who were anti-Semites and thought this was Tolkien like giving them the thumbs up.
Yeah.
Which is actually why there's some funny stuff of the Nazis being confused why Tolkien didn't want their book published, because they thought he was like cool with them, which of course a Nazi is going to twist any media to like fit their beliefs. Again, these people will watch American Psycho and think Patrick Bateman is the good guy. But I will
Exactly.
say, like, this is a passage, and there are more passages like it in Lord of the Rings, that like my personal stance on it, and Lenore might disagree with me. I might be this, admit I have rose-colored glasses for these books, but I genuinely think, given Tolkien's own record as a person and also his own experiences with these weapons of death, what he is trying to kind of get at here is more along the lines of like just like an explanation of another thing in our world that is beyond explanation, right? And that is the
Yeah.
weapons of death. And I genuinely don't think he has ill intentions, if perhaps the execution could have been a little less problematic.
Well, I mean, what do you tell a kid when they ask you, oh, why are there machine guns? Why is there war? Why do people come up with such ingenious ways of killing each other? When you're like 6 years old, it's much easier to hear, yeah, there's like people who just dream up this stuff because like that's what they do, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm thinking of right now the depiction of goblins in Magic the Gathering of all things. He was pretty close to what Tolkien is getting at here. This sort of species that is short-lived because they are impulsive and creative, and they are impulsive and creative because they are short-lived. They are easy to mistake as, stupid, and just like crazy. But no, it's just the nature of the nature of a species that, there's just a bunch of them, right?
There's
Just
a what would be problematic, and of course
yes.
no one would do this, is if the goblins were, I don't know, like ran the bank and they
And
had
they'd had like rebellions, and they were like in the subordinate position to I don't know, like wizards perhaps.
yeah,
I,
no, we're
I
talking about Harry Potter, folks, which was written much later and had much anyway. That one is just anti-Semitic, like, I'm sorry.
oh
Come
yeah.
on, come
Oh
on.
yeah.
But with gosh, the even in the movie, the stars in the bank Not a good look. If you look at the bank's floor, there are star designs in it. Not a good look.
Well,
Uh,
and by now, of course, at time of recording, Rowling herself has wrapped all the way around to Holocaust denial.
Fun how that goes. And I think that history shows that that is not Tolkien's intent, but I also understand that like, and this is a broader conversation, that like the fantasy genre in general and the depiction of various races in fantasy in general can get into like dicey territory,
Yes.
right? Because on the one hand, you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with having fantastical creatures, right? But when you start to think about how those fantastical creatures interact with each other, and then you start to pull from how humans have interacted with each other, it does not take long for those fantastical creatures to become stand-ins for humans. And then sometimes you have two ways it goes. You have the Tolkien way it goes, which is he's just like, well, some of these creatures are evil, and he's got a backstory for it. They were like basically grown in a vat, and then you've got the other side where people do the thing where they're like, oh, well, actually, I'm going to use orcs as like a metaphor for oppressed races, and that's not good either because of a couple things, mainly because race hatred in real life is based on a misconception that people are different, and in like orcs actually are different than humans, and I feel like that's an important thing people miss. Like they are actually 9 feet tall. You know what I mean? Like I always hate when, and maybe I might be rambling here. I don't know, but it's a thing when you get into Tolkien that it's hard not to like think on a little though.
Speaking of creatures that are ontologically just weird and
Let's
wildly
fucking
different,
go.
Riddles in the Dark, Chapter 5, may be the most famous chapter from this particular book, the one that everybody knows, that everybody can quote. We run into Gollum. We'll run into Gollum. Bilbo gets separated from the dwarves after Gandalf straight up ices the Great Goblin. The goblins are coming after him. The dwarves are running. Bilbo gets grabbed from behind and tossed into some dark, dank hole. There's an underground lake, and in that underground lake lives Gollum.
And let me just read this quote. Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone, anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there near the very roots of the mountain. Then it goes on, but in he, does the classic Gollum voice. Lenore, do you have a Gollum impression?
Let's see. What is he, my precious? Whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself through never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I've lost the dwarves and I've lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know, if only I can get away. What's he got in his hands? Said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin, said Gollum, and became quite polite. Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bit, see, my precious. It goes on like that.
Yeah.
But from the beginning, he's my precious, he's, Andy Serkis, what everybody remembers of him. He's this thing that is just, he speaks real sibilant and real like hissing and, fundamentally, recognizable kind of as human. But we don't really get into, well, it's kind of alluded to that he used to be a regular guy and now he ain't.
Yeah, I mean, the narrator, this sort of ambiguous narrator, says he doesn't know where Gollum came from. Uh, Evidence suggests at the time of writing that was true, and Tolkien came up with his backstory later, but
And this is
unclear
neither
though.
this is neither here nor there. It is funny to me that Tolkien makes the difference, makes the distinction between fish and meat.
Yeah, Interesting. I guess. Wait, I know why he does that. It's because of Catholicism.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Love
It's
love the
a
Catholicism sneaking in
again,
there.
kind of a linguistic quirk that we don't know if such a distinction even exists in Middle Earth, but from the perspective of a Catholic narrator, there it is, right? So he goes back and forth, Gollum does, with Bilbo. They have this riddle contest, and if Bilbo wins, Gollum shows him the way out. If Gollum wins, he kills and eats Bilbo. Fairly high stakes. Again, this is something that I appreciate. Tolkien coming back to in Fellowship, because they mentioned the riddle game and like, oh, like the reason that it ended up being so difficult for Bilbo was that all of his riddles come from like his frame of reference as being a hobbit in the Shire. Upon a time, Gollum was a hobbit too, and as long as he spent down there beneath the mountains, like he has that vague memory of what it was like to be a hobbit. He has that vague memory of what the sun was like. So when Bilbo thinks, "Oh, I'm stumping him with something he's never seen," no, no, that is lingering in his memory. So the way the world does get bigger is something that really intrigues me.
Lenore, I have a question for you, and I just made this up off the top of my head. It's just
Sir,
sort of off the dome. What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees, up it goes, and yet never grows? I just made that up. So that's
well, it sounds like a mountain. Don't quote me on this.
the answer is string or nothing,
Oh shit.
which is my favorite joke in this book. Is where Bil Bilbo says, Bilbo says, "What have I got in my pocket?" Gollum thinks it's a riddle. And and then Gollum is allowed to guess, and he goes, "String or nothing." I don't know why. That shit is so funny to me. String or
Well,
nothing is his guess.
and I got this riddle wrong. So, listeners, after this episode, actually, Jacob kills and eats me and
It's
becomes
a
more
ma
powerful.
it's a mammoth burger moment, but it's okay. Um, this is actually already like the seventh incarnation of Lenore. So like she'll come back and be, even she'll be even less liberal and more powerful
The former version of me you could perhaps refer to as Venor.
than Nor. It's true. It's true.
So Bilbo ends up winning, and in the process, he finds well, actually, he's found the ring that Gollum has before even this, right? And
Yeah,
that's what
that's
he's
true.
talking about, like, what have I got in my pocket, right? And
And it's the
yeah,
ring, baby. It's the ring.
and not just any ring, but the ring of power, indeed, that we know from, Lord of the Rings. Sauron invents it to gain dominion over the other rings, and for Bilbo specifically, all he knows about it is it's a magic ring. I put it on. I become invisible. Now I'm the ultimate burglar. What's up?
And also to be
Um,
very clear, people will tell you otherwise, and I'm telling you here right now, Tolkien absolutely did not know that this ring was going to be that important when he wrote this book. There are
mhm.
people who are like, no, he totally did. No, he absolutely did not know this ring was going to be that important. And I love that. I love that he went back to this book and he was like, well, what do I do? I got to do something with. Hey, remember that ring that I didn't really explain? I'm gonna,
Yeah,
I'm gonna make it everything.
and authors do this all the time. Ray Bradbury. He had that story about the fucking the what is it? The Ferris wheel that makes you old, right? He expanded that into something wicked this way comes.
The Ferris wheel that makes you old, much like the beach that makes you old, sipping on the lemonade that kills you from
There
Panera
we
Bread.
go.
And
There
that's
we
our
go.
sponsor this week, folks. The lemonade that kills
Yes.
you.
Yeah,
And fish.
whenever I feel the urge to stuff all this mortal coil, sometimes I'll just pop down to Panera and drink an iced cold glass of lemonade that kills me. I've done this
It's
multiple
true.
times. So, Bilbo, in the process of, this is neither here nor there, but in the process of escaping from Gollum, who is resolved to kill him now, Bilbo jumps over his ass. He jumps, and the text explicitly states, 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Now, I looked this up, at least in the films, Bilbo's depicted as being 4'1". This is like me, 5'7" girl doing a 4 foot high running long jump, which
Pretty good.
fucking superhuman for, an otherwise sedentary creature.
Well, I mean, I think part of that, you could say that maybe it has to do with the ring. I don't know. Maybe it's just Bilbo's just got that took power in him. It's unclear. But
Just the ring turns you into fucking LeBron.
maybe the Bring's powers remain very ambiguous, especially in this book, but they do turn you invisible. That's for sure. And Bilbo is now able to be like a averagely decent burglar. Um, Now that he's literally able to go invisible, he's like a mid-tier burglar. And yeah, he's able to roll back up on his friends who have escaped with the help of Gandalf. And they're just like, yo, Bilbo, you're a heck of a burglar. And he doesn't tell them about the ring because he's like, it would make me much cooler if they didn't know I can go invisible and I can just do everything I can do.
Yeah, yeah, and they're back out in the woods by this point.
And
Um,
notably, and this is another thing that is definitely intentional, out of the frying pan and into the fire is the name of the next chapter.
and
Lenore,
this is the chapter that I always stopped at in my three attempts before this reading The
it's a
Hobbit.
good chapter though,
It is a
I
good
think.
chapter. It is a good chapter, but it cuts off like again, no antipathy toward the book. I just happen to get distracted. It cuts off right before Beorn. It cuts off after, everything else that's like really intriguing that I happen to miss up until recently.
Fun fact, do you know the origin of out of the frying pan into the fire?
I do not.
Okay. It originally comes from a Latin saying that means he runs on Scylla, wishing to avoid Charybdis, and
Oh,
it
Charybdis,
gets
yeah.
Charybdis. Sorry, I can't talk. And then eventually, later on, I forget the person's name, but the Italian author who wrote the fables, a lot of fables, eventually turned.
Aesop?
No, no, it was like one of the lesser known, like Laurentius, I think. Um, Basically took that saying and turned it into a more colloquial out of the frying pan into the fire, and basically, and then it eventually makes it into the Latin collection of Aesop's fables,
Gotcha.
which is what Tolkien is like explicitly referencing here.
Huh.
When I looked it up too, funnily enough, the saying one of its first printed appearances um, is shows up in an 1898 political cartoon urging American intervention in Cuba.
Oh boy.
That's not the reference here, but it says out of the frying pan into the fire. And it's this idea of like, and it's got like a picture of the Spanish, like a symbol of Spain. And it's like, you dealt with the Cuban resistance, but now deal with the real guys. I don't know. Not
This
really
is,
important, but from Puck Magazine, 1898. But Tolkien is definitely doing the Aesop reference here.
you know, when I was getting my driver's license, there was a little bit about like if you're a veteran or something like that shows up in driver's license or whatever, and it's like, oh, here's a list of wars that like if you fought in, you qualify, and it had the fucking Spanish-American War on there.
Well, for those people that like on TikTok who talk about like their past life, like fighting in the Spanish American War.
Oh, what is that called? There's a word for it.
Um, Delusional.
Anyway,
So now
they're
there's
in the
wargs. There's
yeah,
wolves involved.
wargs. Yeah, there's wolves, and like the wolves are kind of down with the goblins. They help each other out now and again. And they chase the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo up a tree.
What
This
pretty birds.
They had no wings, truly. Well, this threw me here. I almost fucking broke right there reading this. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs because Gandalf had started throwing like flaming pine cones to fight back. While those that were burning were running about, howling and setting others alight, till their own friends chased them away, and they fled off down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. What is all this uproar in the forest tonight? Said the Lord of the Eagles. This is the first time that we hear about any such character as the Lord of the Eagles. It's the first time, literally, like I didn't skip anything, listeners. That's literally just how the prose goes. Just out of nowhere, here's the Lord of the Eagles who's chilling and happens to hear this stuff going on, and you'll forgive me for going on a tangent here, but I just couldn't help but imagine what other classic literature would be like if this appeared. From Frankenstein, by Mary Shelley. Why did I not die? More miserable than man ever was before. Why did I not sink into forgetfulness and rest? Death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope, and the next a prey for worms and the decay of the tomb? What is all this uproar in the forest tonight? Said the Lord of the Eagles. Victor
Greatest
Hugo,
book of the millennium, baby.
Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. Jean Valjean laid his hand upon the detaining hand of Javert and opened it as he would have opened the hand of a baby. Then he said to Javert, "You have murdered that woman." "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles.
Same amount of relevance, honestly.
Any any
Greatest
number
book
of
of the
things I could do
millennium.
that with. Yeah.
Listen, readers, if you write books and you're like, well, how do I introduce this character? How do I? Tolkien just did it. I don't know that I suggest the method, but he did it, and everybody let him do it. We all collectively as a society allowed this.
Just literally have no fear, you know?
It's so cool. And the Eagles just appear as like just look, here's the thing. When Tolkien, it's a classic meme, but it is true. When Tolkien is like, how do my characters get from point A to point B? He's like, I've got my Eagles, man. Um, and I love the Eagles. They just roll up and no, I'm not going to be like, why don't the Eagles do whatever? They've got their reasons. And even if they didn't, like, who cares? That's not what the story's about. The story wouldn't be good if the Eagles fixed everything for them. But I do love when a good Eagle swoops in and saves them right from the fire.
This is interesting to me. Like the goblins have come out by now and they put out there's a forest fire and they put out the fire except for the trees that the dwarves and the whole party is up. Like they can do controlled burns. Can
Yeah.
the goblins? They have the special affinity for like controlling fire. Like can goblins do agroecology?
Not only can they're the ones who invented it, and that's why we had World War One, probably,
Ah,
is what Tolkien would say.
the duality of goblins, agroecology, but also mustard gas making agroecology impossible.
Well, that's the thing with goblins, short-lived, but they make their own demise. Here's the thing too, in the next chapter, we get some of the best LGBT representation in literature because we have a
Queer
bear
lodgings.
and it's a bear.
Fuck yeah.
He's literally a bear who is a bear, and he's queer lodgings. I'll listen. We'll get into the queer reading of Lord of the Rings later on, but Beorn, gay king, go off, ska, stand Beorn, all that, snaps, all that.
Mad
Um,
respect.
Mad respect. And Gandalf and Beorn is just a guy who turns into a bear, which and he keeps bees for some reason. And he's got like little animals that wait on his table. I love Beorn.
Yeah.
Possibly descended from a race of creatures created by Sauron. Unclear if you've read the Silmarillion and Lost Tales. But here there seems to be no trace of that. Beorn also just never shows up again in like Lord of the Rings or anything like that, presumably passed on by that time. But he's just like a guy who can turn into a bear who's like a little scary, but here's the thing. In the fairy tale, this is another step. You've got the different things. You've got the riddles, you've got the caves, you've got the dramatic escape. Here you've got the guy who's like your friend, but you've got to win him over and he's a little scary. He's a monster, and you have Gandalf do a little trick where he keeps on having more dwarves show up and he keeps raising the number, which is funny because that's just the same trick he did on Bilbo again.
That is pretty funny. That is pretty
Gandalf's
funny.
only got a few tricks, but they're good ones. They work.
Oh yeah, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 tricks once, but I fear the man who has practiced like 6 tricks a billion times.
Yeah. And that sure is Gandalf. Do you have anything to say about Beorn aside from it's just funny that he exists?
I mean, yeah, there's no other skin changers that I'm aware of in the Legendarium. Like, there's a point where
There is a woman that can turn into a bird.
really,
Yeah, it's I forget her name, but it's Aenor's wife. She can turn into a bulk bird and she puts a Silmaril around her neck for a while. But anyway, go on.
as you do. Well, so Beorn, I mean, the tragedy of Beorn, right, is he tells him how to get through the Mirkwood. He's like, look, I'll outfit you with everything you need to know. I'll supply you with everything you need to like eat, drink, whatever. Just don't stray off the path. Whatever you do, don't go off the path. Like, not for love nor money. Don't go off the fucking path. You will be fine if you don't stray from the path. Literally, that you must not do for any reason. Just stay to the path. Stay to the path. What do? They go off the path.
It's that classic edit of Kamala Harris over and over saying, I'm telling you, don't come. Don't come. And then it's Donald Trump, I'm gonna come. Great video if you haven't heard it. I'm not going to cut it in here because I don't like ripping videos from YouTube because that takes like time. And I'm very lazy. Um, but y'all can look it up, you know. Listen, listeners, if somebody wants to be, become a patron, and I don't mean of a Patreon, I mean I want to become my personal patron and pay for everything, then I will start doing little sound bits. That's my guarantee. But until then, you can just picture it. But yeah, they wander off this fucking path, these dumbasses. They just really can't help themselves, can they?
Yeah, no, and what an inopportune time to do so, because Gandalf has to fuck off to his own business now and then. And it's interesting to me how grumpy Gandalf is in this compared to the next book. Like, what does he say here? I have, as I told you, some pressing business I have. Some pressing business away south, and I'm already late through bothering with you people.
It's not very nice.
Like these people, the dwarves are just, Gandalf sets them on this path. He wants them to succeed. He wants them to reclaim their ancestral kingdom, but they're also just constantly a burden to him.
Yeah, he kind of kidnapped Bilbo too. Like just a step below kidnapping him. So like
He
he's so
just he just
it,
shang he just shanghais Bilbo into this adventure.
admittedly, Gandalf does have some pretty important business. He's got to drive the necromancer out of Mirkwood.
Yes, the necromancer. When does he come back? God.
Well, just later in the book, he's like, "Oh, by the way, we drove the necromancer out of Mirkwood." So that's what
Yeah.
he's doing in this time. Him and the White Council get together. That's him, Saruman, Galadriel, Radagast, and
Yeah.
Elrond, and they just
This
roll up and drive him out of Mirkwood. And it happens off screen, or off page as it should, because they depict it in the film, and it's just, I don't know, a CGI
I mean, again,
mess.
it's Weathertop from the Fellowship film having an orgasm, right? It's just a cavalcade of, CGI effects. It's a fucking video game cutscene that like just what are we doing here? Like get back to the story.
it's
Like,
it's it's cool to have this, like, in the distance you feel this darkness and there's
yeah.
this flash of light from this mysterious character. It's once again, it's this thing Tolkien, and it's not just his writing, it's a thing Tolkien feels deeply personal about. In the Bible, when Moses is dying, I know this sounds random, but I promise this is relevant, and Tolkien would have read this and this would be important to him because he read all of this stuff. When Moses is dying, he wants to see God. And he can't, because if you see God, you just can't see God as a human. You can't do that. And Moses is, because he's like one of the holiest people, able to look upon the back of God, literally the back of God. And that is enough to overwhelm and kill him. And that's the end of Moses's life.
Man.
Um, and 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 there are jokes to be made there, of course. Um, Easy jokes to be made there, of course. But
Jacob expertly cutting me off before I can, do the obvious.
yes, there's easy jests to be made, but it's this idea of like the glimpse of the divine as this thing you can be in tune with, and that is the beauty of it. And
Yeah.
that comes back to his religion, that comes back to his love of myth, because he feels like it's humanity connecting with this spark of something beyond themselves. It comes back to his skepticism, not of science as a whole, but of science like reaching towards understanding humanity. And that's not, but also his frustration with Protestantism. It's the same reason that, it's interesting, he didn't like Dune. Things like that, like the books Dune, actually
Yeah.
Tolkien beefed with, because there are things that are transcendent that he does not want explained. He wants them explicitly left unexplained. And when you
Yes.
then, and a lot of people, and this is a huge problem, especially with fantasy fans. And you see it now with like AI bros who are really into art, who are saying things like, well, what if you could use AI to see more of the Mona Lisa or like the rest of Starry Night or something? It's like the people who, the term jazz is the is the note about the notes they don't play. It's
Yes.
like, whoa, you imagine how cool it would be if they played those notes, like it's that. Tolkien
Yeah, exactly.
understands it's about the notes you don't play, and then the little haunting notes you do. And that's what makes this world so amazing and powerful to people.
It's fundamentally different from, Lovecraft, right? He said, the most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents, right? You pull together all these various sciences, and then like that'll result in an understanding of the universe that will either, you'll go mad from the revelation, or you'll retreat into the, relative peace and safety of a new dark age, right? There's pessimism, and then there's, the fundamental desire just to see beauty in like the sublime, the divine, in things that you don't understand, right? And that's what Tolkien's about.
And there's
And
a
that's
great quote from the next book, and we'll get into it, but where Tolkien says, "He who breaks a thing to find out what it is a fool," right?
yes.
And that's the thing. You sometimes you just got to experience a thing. And are we as podcasters who analyze fiction breaking a thing to find out what it is? No comment. So anyway, there's a spy because we are breaking this down, but it is what it is.
So anyway, yeah, there's
Spiders.
there's giant spiders. The text explicitly says that Bilbo's beating off spiders with his hands.
He is.
Get uh
Get your fan art out of the way. Actually, interestingly, remarkably little NSFW fan art of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, considering how popular it is.
You know what? Cassandra Clare, who wrote the like City of Bones and like
Yeah,
that sort of shit, um, she got her start writing like NSFW, like Gimli and Legolas fan fiction. You can still find that shit.
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of horny fan fiction, fan art. There's actually a remarkably, considering its popularity, again, small amount. It exists, but compared to other franchises of much smaller size, I think they're just people like it's fair. Tolkien fans, it's pretty sacred to them, I guess. I don't know. You just don't find a whole lot of horny Tolkien fan art. Like you have to really seek it out to find it.
That's so wild to me.
Even if you look for it, like you look on it, like something on like DeviantArt or something like that, or like Rule 34 or something, like the results are actually quite limited. Um, there'll be like dozens of images, which is considering the size of this franchise. Whatever. Um, And yes, I have looked for horny Tolkien art. It doesn't matter. I was
Who among
curious.
us
I was
has
curious.
not?
I was curious. Most of it is bad. So, as all horny art is, not all horny art is bad, but as most horny fan art is, it's mostly just like, let's swell up someone's body part, and that's it. Um,
They then turn me balloon. God, real ones know what
balloon
I'm
of
talking about.
myself. I'm a balloon of myself.
So they get away from the spiders.
Tolkien would hate this episode.
Rest in peace, Tolkien. Far away from the fucking
My man has gone to Valinor. He is not worried about us. He is
yes,
not.
yes.
He's in the
Uh
halls of fucking Mandos.
Across the sea, a pale moon rises and does not look upon, the fucking inflating dragons. So they get captured by they get away from the spiders, they get captured by the wood elves. It's not explicitly stated to be Elven King Thranduil,
It is
but
though.
it is.
It's later on confirmed to be Elven King Thranduil in the next book.
Yeah, so they're imprisoned by the wood elves for a while, all separate, but Bilbo
There's a
manages.
redheaded elf falls in love with Felix. No, I'm kidding. That's in the movie.
And Bilbo devises a plan to get out of the imprisonment. He goes to all the dwarves. He says, "Hey, you're not alone. Thorin's here. You're all here, and we're gonna get out of this." And he's like, "Okay, there's these barrels. Eventually, they're gonna get rid of these barrels down this river. So we're all gonna hide in barrels." This was funny to me. He comes upon like the butler and the captain of the guard, I think, and he gets all the dwarves hidden in the barrels, and one of the elves there is like, "Oh, like some of these barrels that we're getting rid of are oddly like they're oddly heavy. Like, are they still full? Get on with the work," growled the butler. "There is nothing in the feeling of weight in an idle tosspot's arms," which is an elf way of like, "Do you even lift?"
It's awesome.
It's awesome. It's
Because
awesome.
elves don't really get buff, which is funny. Like they're not going to get buff no matter how much they lift. So it's like a question of it's he's just an idle tosspot of a man.
There are no bears among the elves.
That's true. There are barons among the elves and
Aha.
Luthians. Actually, Baron is a human, so that doesn't really work, but he is among the elves, hence leading to a Romeo and Juliet style situation. So they go to Lake Town, the town overseen by a crooked man. The closest thing there is to like Tolkien's take on politics in this book is just the mayor of Lake Town being like a generally corrupt guy.
Giving his mind to trade and tolls, to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position. He's very much I mean, he's the bourgeoisie,
He
to the
is.
to the extent that that exists in Tolkien's world.
This chapter you also get a nice little song. The king beneath the mountains, the king of carved stone, the lord of silver fountains shall come unto his own, and so on. You
I'm
get the
always
idea.
coming into my own.
I'm always coming into my own. Always doing that. And everyone is very, very, very excited. Everyone's talking about gold. And Thorin at this point, listen, Thorin has not had a lot of character up to this point. He has been just generic leader of the party when Gandalf's not around, serious dwarf. It is in this moment Thorin is really able to take on a role of being a little bit more than that. And it's when he starts being reminded of his role as king of the mountain. And Thorin is like, yeah, I am the king of the mountain.
There's a
Oh,
digression
yeah.
on dwarves here, similar to Tolkien's digression on goblins that I want to get into a little bit. Um, there it is. Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots, some are not, but are decent enough people like Thorin and company, if you don't expect too much. And here's the seed of what we'll see, of course, because, of course, getting rid of the dragon we're only three-quarters of the way through the book at that point. The dwarves, Thorin specifically has his own agenda that revolves around, getting his.
They go to the mountain. They find the little secret door. Bilbo slips in. It is burglar time. It is a burglar moment for Bilbo. And I want to read this as he sneaks into the dragon's lair. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon fast asleep. A thrumming came from his jaws and nostrils and wisps of smoke, but his fires were low in slumber. Beneath him, under all his limbs and his huge coiled tail, and about him on all sides, stretching away across the unseen floors, lay countless piles of precious things, gold, wrought and unwrought, gems and jewels, and silver red stained in the ruddy light. Smaug lay with wings folded like an immeasurable bat, turned partly on one side so the hobbit could see his underparts, and his long pale belly crusted with gems and fragments of gold from his long lying on his costly bed. Behind him, where the walls were nearest, could dimly be seen coats of mail, helms and axes, swords and spears hanging, and there in rows stood great jars and vessels filled with a wealth that could not be guessed. And basically, Smaug, him going in there, is gonna wake up at a certain point, and because he goes back in at another point, and Bilbo and Smaug have like a conversation. Smaug trying to sniff him out, Bilbo invisible. Smaug turns out to be like a pretty smart guy, all things concerned, but it's just this huge pile of gold. You've got the dragon's hoard at the end of the journey. Here it is, baby.
I can't remember which financial journal this was, but I don't know if it was WSJ or The Economist or what, but like there was a list of like the most wealthy fictional characters that was kind of tongue in cheek, and Smaug topped the list because, as the text says, his wealth is literally incalculable.
Bro had a lot
And
of money.
well, and as well, like Bilbo steals a cup early on in this encounter to sort of prove himself to the dwarves, and is like, "Yeah, I found the treasure. Here it is." Um, and Smaug immediately, figures out that this is missing because he has an encyclopedic knowledge of his hoard, right? And Tolkien says this is another brush with politics here. His rage passes description, the sort of rage that is only seen when rich folk that have more than they can enjoy suddenly lose something that they have long had but have never before used or wanted. Again, it's capital that exists for the sake of the amassing.
What do you think of Bilbo's like interactions with Smaug? Because you have Smaug being like, "Well, thief, I smell you and I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along, help yourself again. There is plenty to spare." And Bilbo's got to like do a whole, "Oh, Smaug the Tremendous," and they're kind of
Yeah,
like back and
you know,
forth.
and that's it's a fun little it's a fun little exchange that makes its way into all the adaptations. Bilbo's rizzing him up, but also trying to rizz himself up. He's giving himself all these cool nicknames based on his adventures.
He
He's like,
accidentally causes mass murder by bragging and calling himself Barrel Rider, and Smaug's like, "Time to go kill those lake men."
yep, yep, yep. I came from the end of a bag, but no bag went over me. Again, this is where when Bilbo's forced to think on his feet, I mean, in general, when a character has to think on his feet, we'll get into this in the Death Note episodes, but I really like when characters are forced into a corner and have to like come up with shit on the fly, and that's what Bilbo's doing here, right? He's like, oh, I'll make my own legends, I'll make my own names out of my own experiences and make the absolutely mundane sound fantastical to this staggeringly powerful creature that I have to not get killed by.
I like this part where he says, Smaug says, "I don't know if it has occurred to you that even if you could steal the gold bit by bit, a matter of 100 years or so, you could not get it very far. Not much use on the mountainside, not much use in the forest. Bless me! Had you never thought of the catch? A 14th share, I suppose, or something like it. Those were the terms, eh? But what about delivery? What about cartage? What about armed guards and tolls?" And I find that very funny. Because it is a good question. Like, what was the plan? That Bilbo was just going to keep going back and forth, taking like one coin at a time? Like, they really didn't think this very far ahead. They were just like, once we get there, we'll figure it out.
Exactly.
And it is kind of amusing.
And again, if you're just Scheherazade style, like making this up like night after night, right? That's the sort of corner that you write yourself into. And if you're a particularly like self-referential, like astute writer sort, you can make fun of yourself on that front. You can have characters literally calling you out, being like, "Oh, well, like when he got to this point, what the fuck were you gonna do?" Right? Um,
Or you might be a young man who reads this and says, what about delivery? What about cartage? What about armed guards and tolls? That boy, George R. R. Martin.
indeed, indeed.
He does. And he's just like fascinating, which there's obviously the classic George R. R. Martin quote. I know Aragorn was a good king, but what was his tax policy?
Yes. Well, and again, of course, there is yet that attention to the larger lore, right? There is that attention to the wider world that Tolkien has. Never laugh at live dragons, Bilbo, you fool, Bilbo said to himself, and it became a favorite saying of his later and passed into a proverb. This is not just a fable, this is not just a fairy tale, this is an installment in, the history of this world that later became ours. Thousands of years in the past, there's stuff that we recognize that pops up in our world, and there's stuff that has just fallen out of use, because that's what things do.
Mhm.
There's a whole wide mythos that we've just forgotten, or that we only have snatches of.
Absolutely. Around this time, Bilbo notices that Smaug is his stomach. It is covered in diamonds, which will protect his stomach from attack, but there is a small gap in his chest. Bilbo will at one point pass this on to a random talking bird, who will then pass it on to a Bard the Archer, who is sort of a character who will show up in a minute here. Um, and of course,
Whose name is literally introduced to us in a parenthetical.
yes.
No one had dared to give battle to him, Smaug, for many an age, nor would they have dared now, if it had not been for the grim-voiced man, Bard was his name, who ran to and fro cheering on the archers and urging the master to order them to fight to the last arrow.
Basically, Smaug takes off, and then the dwarves examine all the gold, and they're just freaking out. Like, we got the gold, let's go. Thorin is popping off. He's like, I'm the king. And he is looking for the Arkenstone, which is like kind of introduced quite late, but is very important to this book.
This is I'll out myself a little bit here. I thought that was made up for the film.
Oh, no. The Arkenstones, it sounds like a thing made up for the film. It seems like a ring stand-in, but no, Arkenstone, it's a real thing. The great white gem of the mountain. Um, He describes it, the Arkenstone, murmured Thorin in the dark, half dreaming with his chin upon his knees. It was like a globe with 1,000 facets. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon. Bilbo eventually finds the Arkenstone at some point. And doesn't immediately reveal it because it's kind of important. But the Arkenstone is this light gem they find at the base of the mountain. And to reveal my hand here as a Tolkien head, the Arkenstone is a point of much debate. Do you know what the debate is, Lenore?
Is it like one of the Silmarils or some shit?
Whether or not the Arkenstone is a Silmaril. The
Mm.
Arkenstone fits the description of the Silmaril. It is a white gem that is multifaceted, that shines with a light inside itself, and that has an effect on the minds of all. Notably, the rings of power even have very limited effect on dwarves. And the Arkenstone drives them fucking crazy, implying a certain level of power in this gem. When the Silmarils were discarded, one went into the sea, one went into the earth, one went into the sky. It is not unreasonable to say that this is the Silmaril of the earth. However, there's just no way of confirming that. Tolkien had presumably conceived of the Silmarils by this time because that was earlier than Lord of the Rings. The concept of the Silmarils, the concept of Valinor, all of that. He had probably not at this point fleshed out their fate, aside from they would be lost. It is unlikely that this is the sort of general consensus. It is unlikely that the Arkenstone is supposed to be a Silmaril. It is more likely that Tolkien, not thinking he would never really get to write the Silmarillion, throwing his Silmaril into this book and then running into the challenge later of being written into a corner saying, and the Silmarils would not be seen again till the end of the world, which is the thing everyone cites saying this can't be a Silmaril. And then other people cite, okay, but it's described exactly like one in the exact place in the earth. It's a Silmaril. And the debate goes ever circular on from there. Feel about it how you will, or don't. People feel very strongly about this. I'll put my 2 cents out there. I think it doesn't necessarily violate the lore if a Silmaril gets found for like a day and then reburied. I think that doesn't violate. It was not brought forth again till the end of the world. Like it wasn't. It stayed like in the mountain, then it went back down. But like if that bothers you, it doesn't have to be a Silmaril. Ultimately, it's written by the same author. That's also a way of explaining why they sound like the same thing, you know?
Not to get in the weeds with Frankowski again, but Conrad Stargard, talking about Father Ignacy in Crosstime Engineer, right? Saying, oh, this person's value system is completely foreign to me. This priest from the 1200s is actively concerned about the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin. Like me as a near total outsider to Tolkien's Legendarium, that's the whole Arkenstone discourse for me.
Right. No, and that's, understandable. And just for the reader to get or listener to get an idea, Arkenstone, heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description, but indeed there could not be 2 such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now as he came near, it was tingled with a flickering sparkle of many colors at the surface, reflected and splintered from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it, and he caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet, cut and fashioned by the dwarves who had dug it from the heart of the mountain long ago, it took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance, shot with glints of rainbow. Anyway, that's what it looks like.
It's cool. It's shiny. Hideously expensive. And yeah, especially for dwarves, like treasure has this really, really like near totally magical hold on them.
They love that stuff. They love that stuff. And it makes like a quick note of like a dragon's hoard. Also, like there's like greed magic. It's kind of like an implied, like there's like a vibe of like making people greedy that a dragon's gold has. But Lake Town, what's happening there? I'm sure everything's going well, right?
Yeah, yeah, everything's going well. They're on a lake. They're living it up. And oh yeah, there's a dragon coming. It's oh, what's that? It's all made of wood. Oh, that might be a problem.
Yeah, Fire and Water, chapter 14. Um, yeah, they saw lights in the distance and they said, perhaps the king of the mountain is forging gold. And then, nah, that's not what's happening. Fire is leaping from a dragon's jaws and he is circling high above them, lighting all the lake, and the trees shone like copper and like blood, with leaping shadows of dense black at their feet. Then down he swooped straight through the arrow storm, reckless in his rage, taking no heed to turn his scaly side towards his foes, seeking only to set their town ablaze. And so on and so on. It's a bad time to live in a wooden town.
It's a bad time, yes, but fortunately they got people like Bard.
Yeah,
Bard.
and a random dwarf who will come help him because he's from the race of Dale, which is very
Yeah. Yeah,
Dale.
Dale.
Dale Earnhardt. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah, Dale Earnhardt, the famous dwarf. Um There is a city there was a city called Dale in the area once upon a time, and that's the sort of lineage that Bard and them descend from, or
Yeah,
that
because there
Bard
was a
specific.
human connected city to the dwarves. The humans and dwarves kind of had a symbiotic relationship to Erebor and Dale.
Yeah, and that's the legend, right? That there were these dudes who lived in the mountain that made all sorts of like rich stuff. And one day the river will flow with gold again. And I like how Tolkien plays with prophecy, right? Because in a sense that kind of does happen.
Oh yeah, it surely does. Um, but Bard basically, the bird comes up to him and he's like, "Yo, check that bear patch on his chest." And Bard's like, "Well, I got me a lucky black arrow." Bang! And he brings that big boy down.
Literally, like arrow, said the bowman, black arrow, I have saved you to the last. You've never failed me, and always I've recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from of old. If ever you came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now and speed well. And that's just, I mean, you have that catharsis of an artifact of the old time, right? Of that old kingdom that Smaug despoiled, right? Coming back to literally stab him, right?
Hmm.
You have that, but you also have the again, I don't know that we ever see Bard again in Tolkien ever, but like he had other adventures, he had other enemies that he laid low and retrieved this arrow from.
By the
Again,
time of Lord of the Rings, Dale is like a fairly successful like city state.
yeah.
So, the Bard is presumably not living anymore, but like he's set up this like successful little like city, like I said, city state. So
King by acclamation, the people are like, yeah, we'll have King Bard, King Bard.
Tolkien's ideal form of government is everyone just starts chanting a guy's name and that guy becomes the king and he only does good things.
People further off took up the cry, up the bowman, down with money bags. In my head as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, up, up with the bowman, down,
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 down with
down
money
with money
bags,
bags. I love it. I love it.
till the clamor echoed along the shore. There's that, and yet, there's the I mentioned this to you earlier, Jacob, but like Tolkien has this moment of celebration, but he also has this sobriety, that elevates this slightly above, and they lived happily ever after, right? Because again, the town has been laid waste nonetheless by Smaug. Smaug is dead, but so is the fucking town. Many took ill of wet and cold and sorrow that night, and afterwards died who had escaped uninjured from the ruin of the town. And in the days that followed, there was much sickness and great hunger. Again,
Hmm.
Tolkien doesn't get into this to the extent like a George R. Martin or a Joe Abercrombie, right? But every town has an agricultural base. There has to be housing for these people. There has to be food for these people, and if that's disrupted, it's a very delicate ecosystem, even in this sort of medieval mode of production,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
which if disrupted, causes great hunger. Um, Chapter 16, of course, we can't escape it, Jacob. A thief in the night.
It keeps coming back. It keeps coming back,
Like a
you know,
thief in the night.
like a thief in the night. it's, it's the Bible passage. What do you want me to say, folks? I've quoted it. I've said it. There's a movie of it that I'm not going to watch or talk about, but Worst of All Possible Worlds has a pretty good episode on it. Um, A Thief of the Night, Bilbo Baggins is like, this is getting out of hand because at this point, the elves are rolling up because they're like, yo, things are going down. So all the elves roll up. All the humans are like, we're going back to our old town and we're going to see what's going on in the mountain.
Because
Thor,
the horde, Smaug's horde has like some of the elves' rich stuff. It has some ancestrally like the humans' wealth from long ago. So everybody has a stake in this one particular dragon horde that has been plundered from the despoiled lands around.
and then of course, the dwarves have now like fortified the mountain, and Thorin's like, yo, I'm the king under the mountain. I control all this gold. Y'all have to follow me. And they're not digging that. And Bilbo's like, shoot, this is a bad situation. I'm gonna have to fix this problem. Um, so yeah, Bilbo as the protagonist of the story does not get to slay the dragon, as he might get in like a, as classic fairy tale as this is not so classic fairy tale that, it's gonna have Bilbo take up his sword and slay the dragon. But Bilbo does what Tolkien finds to be the greater honor, right? The greater thing, which is to bring peace. And
Yes.
we'll see this more in Lord of the Rings, but to be a peace bringer, to be a healer, is seen as a much, much higher honor. It is seen as a much more beautiful thing, which is of course objectively true. But when you get into like fiction and fantasy, it has less, it's less epic, it's less not in like the internet sense, epic in the like dramatic sense, epic fantasy sense. It is less dramatic. It has less kick to be, just a guy who like stitches together arms and works out treaties. But that is to Tolkien
Exactly.
the actual slaying of the dragon. The dragon is just kind of this beast, but the conflict here between these different people, that is the real conflict to be resolved.
Yes, there's winning the war, and yet there's also, even more important is winning the peace, right? Settling what comes after. I mean, Thorin himself says it as he lays on his deathbed, spoiler alert. There is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. He's talking to Bilbo here. Some courage and some wisdom, blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. You know, like it's not merely the of course there's the old songs about this or that hero and slaying this or that dragon, this or that epic feat. But again, there have to be people around to sing them. There have to be occasions that give rise to the singing of them. There have to be, there has to be food, there has to be the agricultural base, there has to be the culinary skill, there has to be the people and their interests, their skills, their backgrounds that weave together into this tapestry and produce these occasions of of celebration and remembrance, right? And that's what really makes life worth living. That is what indeed, that's what the hobbits live, day after day in.
It was really beautiful when Thorin started singing Imagine by John Lennon.
In fucking Richard
Yeah,
Armitage's voice.
yeah. Imagine there's no Valinor and no
Thorin just
Mordor either.
Thorin just like on fucking TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, they're just Bilbo just like finish him off, put him out of his misery. The king
Gale
under
talk.
the mountain. Um, yeah, yeah. That I was either going to do that bit or you said a merrier world. I was going to say a Pippiner world, and that's not anything. Um, but yeah, it kind of wraps up. Gandalf shows back up, and he's like, "We got to work this out." So Bilbo pulls a whole stunt where he's like, "I'm gonna sneak the Arkenstone out, and then we can use this as a bargaining chip." And then all of a sudden, some other dwarves roll up from King Dane from the Iron Hills. But it is just at this moment, in very story fashion, that the goblins and wargs have caught up with them, and they all have to form an alliance.
Yes, yes. Studio triggers the Hobbit, like it's these guys that are fighting, and then they team up and they fight against the greater antagonist, which is, yeah, the
Battle
armies.
of the Five Armies. And to be clear, The Eagles are not an army. I want to make that very clear. The Eagles are not an army. People get that wrong. The Eagles show up and help in the battle, but they are not an army. The 5 armies are the humans, the dwarves, the elves, the goblins, and the wargs. There's 2 armies on one side, 3 armies on the other side. You might be asking, are the wargs and goblins really part of separate armies? The answer is no, not really. However, that is how it is counted so regularly, including for a while on Tolkien Gateway. It said the Eagles were one of the 5 armies. And the Silmaril thing, feel how you will about it. But this one, the Eagles were not one of the 5 armies. And the Eagles, they know their place. We should know their place as well. And they would never consider themselves part of one of the armies because they're above being part of one of the armies. They just show up to do stuff when they feel like it. And I just think that we should all, I think our main takeaway should be that the Eagles were not one of the 5 armies in the Battle of the 5 Armies. And whoever put that on Tolkien Gateway and it was up there for like a few hours, that's absolutely unbelievable. Disgusting behavior from the community. I'm sickened.
There are people who wake up in the morning and they wonder where their next meal is coming from, whether they're going to see their loved ones again. Some of us wonder, okay, are the Eagles an army or not?
Well, the thing is, these are interconnected because if you say the Eagles are an army, you will never see your loved ones again because I am coming. You
Jesus.
will not see your next meal because they are not an army. It's explicit in this text. But anyway, Bilbo, it is kind of funny, gets knocked out immediately at the start of the battle.
Not as immediately as I thought. I've heard people meme about, like Tolkien, like skips this entire battle by just
Well, he doesn't
knocking
skip
Bilbo
it.
out.
He's just
Yeah,
Bilbo's
exactly.
just-
There's ebbs and flows, right? The elves make this offensive and then they're pushed back. The dwarves, like just 13 of the dwarves from the mountain, they mount this heroic defense on this wall that they built basically overnight because dwarves are incredible at masonry, right? There's bits and pieces here of like a legit battle that Tolkien
Oh
writes.
yeah, the arms of the mountains are coming down. It's just funny
Yes.
that as soon as Bilbo enters the fray personally, he gets knocked out.
Right, it's right after the Eagles enter and sort of start turning the tide.
Yeah, he says the eagle, boom, he's out.
Exactly. It's and that's not the first thing. That's not the first time, notably in this book, that Bilbo has been knocked out during a pivotal moment. So there is a recurring sort of joke that this is in service of, not just like skipping a action scene. Tolkien's not afraid to write an action scene.
Oh yeah, not at all, especially not in the next one. But Tolkien was also in moments conscious of children writing this book. He writes about it in his letters, but he has moments where he wanted to lean more into certain things and then thought this is primarily for kids. Which there are still moments in this that I think are like could be pretty spooky for a kid, but it also just depends who the kid is. Tolkien's children are, I'm sure, were exposed to things much worse than this because Tolkien was just reading like terrifying fairy tales to them, like the fairy tales about Tolkien. Like, here's the thing, Tolkien loved to talk about like Father Christmas and stuff like that. He was big on that. He was big on like Santa Claus lore, and that included like evil Santa Claus lore and stuff like that too. Like Tolkien was the guy. Yeah, Tolkien was the guy who was telling his kids Krampus was real. Like,
yeah.
So his kids were not scared by any of this, but he did have like some friends who were like, this was a little scary for my child. He didn't like the part where there's a creature named Gollum with glowing lamp eyes that will strangle you in the night. And Tolkien was like, don't worry, my next book will be better. No, actually, it's much scarier. My bad. There's a part where a guy gets decapitated and they burn a symbol onto his head. Sorry.
If there's anything the Austrians have given the world that I wish was more common, it's the idea of this like fucking like goat demon that goes around like beating unruly children and like
Oh, but enough about Gandalf. No, I'm just kidding. Because he does show up at the end just to be like, I'm Gandalf. Remember me? I'm here to solve all the problems. Say I understood everything.
It's so wild to me. Like, it's as long as we're on the subject of like the cinematic universe or the literary universe of places that have Christmas that shouldn't. Like there's a line in here that's like anyway, by midwinter Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back along both edges of the forest to the doors of Beorn's house, and there for a while they both stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there. They got fucking Yuletide here.
They've got Yuletide, and in Lord of the Rings Online, Yuletide is an actual in-game holiday. And for a week in the game, there's like different skins you can get. Your horses can have tinsel on them. It's a lot of fun. There's like skins you can only unlock during Yuletide. There's special missions.
So like okay, Christmas in Narnia, Yuletide in Middle Earth, Life Day in Star Wars. Like are all these things the same?
Um, no, because nothing beats Santa Claus rolling up and giving you a sword and then being sexist and leaving, which is
He just gives you a sword and he's like, bitches, am I right?
yeah. Women can't fight.
Ho,
Remember that,
ho,
kids.
hoes, am I right?
Yeah.
It's late at night,
Mm,
folks.
yeah. Yeah. Remember, women can't fight in wars. My work here is done. That's what it's in the video. Why why is that in the book?
If I knew, I would be sexist.
That's so gosh, from the mind of C.S. Lewis. Tolkien took himself seriously, but Tolkien, if he wanted to understand
C.S.
in this
Lewis,
way,
like, chicks, seriously, Lewis.
we take those. We take what does J.R.R. stand for?
Uh,
John Ronald Reuel. Um, then there's a whole they head back and you have the elves like singing a song again. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Goes on. And then he says, Tralala, come back to the valley. They're very happy about the fact that the dragon is beaten. Um, but then you get a genuinely very, very charming and very, very important and the last poem song of the book. And it's Bilbo's own verse. And he says, he sees his hill and he sings, roads go ever on ever, ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon, and it goes on. But it's important because this will be quoted repeatedly in the next few books. But it's Bilbo having this moment where Bilbo is now like Gandalfified a little bit, right? Like it's like something that Gandalf would sort of sing or be humming to himself, you know? And it's now Bilbo coming home, just him and Gandalf hanging out. And Bilbo has now just like picked up this quest quirkiness that he will then carry through the rest of his life.
Any day now, somebody's going to commission me for 3,000 words of Gandalfification.
Gandalf, the beard kept growing. He says, my face can't take it anymore, but he could take just one more hair.
God, it's coming. I can feel it.
It's coming just like Bilbo when he gets Gandalfified. Oh, Lord God, Almighty. Anyway, Bilbo comes back to his own estate sale. It's a good bet.
Oh yes, yes. This is where we first get a whiff of his rivalry with the Sackville Bagginses, his this cadet branch of his family that always wants his really kick-ass manor.
Mm.
There's I mentioned the Lord of the Rings set earlier of Magic the Gathering, right? Lobelia Sackville Baggins is a card. I mean, can we just dwell on the fantastic flavor win that's like she exiles a creature from your opponent's graveyard and then you get like X amount of treasures. Like literally she benefits from this from a character going away forever, right? That's what she does in the story, right? She just flashes in there, she has flash, which is a keyword, and says, yeah, like you get this treasure now from this person going away forever. Um And that's what she's doing here. She's like, okay, well, this relative of mine is presumed dead. I'm gonna sell all his shit.
Mm. The book closes with basically just Balin visits again, and Bilbo has been writing there and back again, A Hobbit's Holiday. And yeah, basically it's just they're like everything is good. The old master, that guy, he sucks. He's dead. Everybody's doing pretty well, all things considered. And then Bilbo says, and this is the last few paragraphs of the book. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. And why should not they prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world, after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. And that's the end. Reminding us all, kids, make sure you get your smoke today, or have you really had a good day at all? Blow you some
Smoking
smoke.
is cool. This is the pro-smoking podcast, the Socialist Shelf.
I cannot come out against pipe smoking if you're the type of person who can do it. That's cool. I'm not going to do it, but I've known people who are pipe smokers. You got to be over a certain age or it seems try hard. But like old men who smoke pipes, I got to like that's a cool vibe. I got to hand it to them. You know what I mean? That's a vibe. If you can blow a smoke ring, I'm not saying it's good, but like it's cool. That's for sure.
Do they have hookahs in Middle-earth?
I'm pretty sure that's just, I mean, they have the different types of leaf and weed. Um,
Mm.
that they smoke. They the next books get really into the different types of tobacco and like the different flavors and stuff. After the Battle of Isengard, there's like a whole thing on it. Um,
It is interesting to me though to tie it sort of back to a something resembling a larger theme here. Like I mean, the Gandalf says that look, you had a hand in this, right? You're a little fellow in a wide world, and yet you had a hand in shaping what happened um, to resemble this storied prophecy, right? You played your part, however small, in fate, in history, indeed. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. Um, it's astonishing to me, and it was a little bit surprising to end on this note, but it makes sense because, he's talking to a physical god, right? He's talking to a wizard, one of the most powerful beings in Middle-earth. But where does the wizard come to chill? He comes to Bag End. He comes to smoke with a hobbit. The tobacco jar is where he ends his this particular leg of his story. It's the smallest creature has the potential to change the course of history. Like a burglar can set in motion a chain of events that brings down a dragon. A wizard can, warm his feet at that same burglar's hearth. This is a world that, defines high fantasy, that catches, not just these characters, but the world at its most pivotal and interesting moments. The fate of the world is decided at the moment that we are observing it. Um, and who has a hand in deciding it? The most otherwise unassuming of creatures.
yeah.
And that's something that it's a theme that is inseparable from this story, and that if you ask somebody, okay, what do you think of when you think of little people doing great things, this is one of those.
Yeah, it's David and Goliath, it's that classic tale. I mean, there's that just amazing in the opening monologue of the Lord of the Rings films, that amazing Kate Blanchett, by the most unlikely of creatures, a hobbit. Um, it is, obviously we love an underdog story, but in this sense, it's not just an underdog, right? Because it's somebody who's really not even in the fight until they realize that they are part of the world and they get to insert themselves into a world that you can imagine has been the same for so long that, yeah, there wars and their stuff, but it's been like, it doesn't come to these moments of like transition between ages, right? Because this story happens at the end, and we'll talk about it next week, at the end of the third age. Like there is literally an age of the earth coming to a close. And there's like this very small like pressure point that can be pushed on here. This the tiniest little lever, and only like the little Hobbit hands can pull it, you know? At the end of the day, where these big heroes go is determined by these very, very small moments. And that's obviously encouraging, especially like, you know, it's a great message to give to children that are the target of the book, but it's also just a beautiful like little thing in general, and it allows the hobbits to work on an even greater scale in the next book. And you know, if you pardon my socialisting of this, it also allows us to understand ourselves as very small actors in history who nevertheless have the chance to participate in it, and we have no idea you know, where the little cracks are, right? We don't know where the thrush is going to knock and we're going to insert the key. We don't know who's going to be the one who's going to spot the little patch in the dragon's armor, but we do know that if we don't go on the journey, it's not going to happen at all. So there's something charming and remarkable and inspiring about that, in the same way of all fairy tales and folklore. And there's a reason people have loved Tolkien for, you know, the better nearly a century now, you know, come or 80 years or so. And there's a reason they will continue to for the foreseeable future. And he continues to influence people massively. And there's a reason that this is just part one of our Tolkien series, because, oh boy, is there a lot to go.
Oh, yes, yes. Welcome to Long Series Summer, y'all. Long Series Long Summer, you know, in the sense of the long 19th century, you know, incorporating some of the like 18th century into it, because, you know, you have to understand X to understand Y chronologically, like, you know. It's spring as we record, but this will kick off a series that leads ideally into the summer and beyond. Um and who knows? It might not just be Lord of the Rings. It might be something that I've already mentioned in earlier episodes. You know, again, small hands at the wheel of prophecy, right? Just like pushing it and pushing it until it actually comes about. We will talk about Death Note on the show eventually. The thing that
I was gonna say, that's right. We're doing all the cross-time engineer books.
I have them lying around, Jake.
We're
I
not
have
doing
them
all
lying
the,
around, Jacob.
we're doing every Left Behind book, including the children's.
That's not a threat. That's a challenge. I will rise to that challenge.
There's just not new stuff to say after a couple of them, unfortunately. You're just like, wow, evangelicals, man.
Be
Yeah.
very, very careful what you wish for, my friend.
I'm wishing against it. I'm not wishing for it. I'm wishing against it. Well, folks, this is not goodbye. This is merely the first leg on our journey. So reach for the tobacco jar, wait some decades, and we'll be back with Bilbo's birthday party very, very soon. Actually, I don't know if it's going to be next week or if we're going to space them out every other week and do books in between. We haven't actually decided that, but you'll be the first to know. Yes, you listener specifically, whoever you are, I'm DMing you as we speak. So yeah, this is a personal shout out to insert your name here. Lenore, do you have any final thoughts before we close out on this unexpected journey here, The Hobbit?
Did you just turn our podcast into a like self-insert fic, like Jacob Lenore, your name?
I feel like, you know, that's what podcasts allow. It's sort of a parasocial sitting in on a conversation type beat. So yeah, why not?
Why not?
Socialist Shelf fan fiction. I don't really know what there is to do in Socialist Shelf fan fiction, but you know,
The parasocialist shelf, if you will. And
Finally,
I will.
finally, the parasocialist shelf. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. And I don't have an end. That's all I have to say.
There isn't an end. Nothing ends, Jacob.
Except the third age in a few books. and we will see you for that very soon. Bye.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.